Reborn as the Viking pirate king. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination, so don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like, and if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 351, First Night Rites. Back inside, with a painstaking translation of more than 20 English farmhands, Old Man Clint finally understood the whole story. It all stemmed from a privilege held by the French nobility, the right of the first night. Looking across the entire Western continent, the 7 kingdoms of England were considered wealthy compared to the Vikings, but compared to the Duchy of France across the Channel, they were like hyenas beside a lion, insignificant. While the lower classes of the English Isles generally didn't starve to death, they occasionally faced hunger during years of disaster. However, in the fertile land and powerful Duchy of France, even beggars relying solely on begging could live comfortably and comfortably. The reason was simple: this was a land blessed by the gods. France boasted the most fertile soil in the entire Western continent. Legend had it that it was the site of Gaia, the Earth Mother's arrival 5,000 years ago. During her thousands of years of residence there, she used her powerful alien psychic powers to successfully transform the surrounding continent. Even after thousands of years, no nation in the Western continent could rival the Duchy of France in terms of soil quality. France's crops, renowned for their exceptional flavor and rich nutrition, were known as the king's tribute. The same crops, whether wheat, vegetables, or fruits, produced in France, could command at least 3 times the price when shipped across the Mediterranean and sold to other city-states. If shipped to the eastern continent, the price would increase by at least 10 times. Furthermore, thanks to the precious psychic energy lingering in the soil, this region boasts the highest concentration of rare species from ancient times, such as dragons, Pegasus, mermaids, and unicorns. This is not to mention the hundreds of precious medicinal herbs that have survived from ancient times and can only thrive in French soil. Given this precious land, it's easy to see that the Duchy of France was a veritable paradise for any hard-working farmer. In the Middle Ages, with a limited military presence and the vast wasteland surrounding their borders, the Western continent lacked the fortitude to build a massive wall, as Qin Shi Huang did. Here, countries were unable to effectively regulate the migrants crossing their borders. French farmers could earn 3 to 5 times more per year than farmers in other countries. Who wouldn't want to come to such a perfect country? The Plantagenets imposed no special restrictions on outsiders, as long as they didn't commit crimes. After all, in this era, issues like land depletion and sustainable development were far from a concern. With the exception of the Tang dynasty in the east, every nation possessed vast tracts of uncultivated land. No nation would refuse entry. However, once they entered France, they wouldn't enjoy unfettered personal freedom. The right of the first night was the price farmers had to pay for using this land. Under the Plantagenet monarchy, there were 21 provinces. All of them enforced this decree. For the Romantic French, no one would refuse a beautiful virgin. Within the 21 provinces, everyone without a title, from farmers and merchants to farmhands and even employers, was required to obey this decree unconditionally. On their wedding night, the bride's first sexual intercourse had to be performed by the lord. This was the price they paid for the use of this fertile land. This, of course, included the Cloud province, far overseas, leased by the Kingdom of Mercia. That old fellow named André Jarvin is a pervert. It's one thing to give Miss Elena's virginity to him just to keep her job as a flower farmer, but I didn't expect him to. Before the chestnut-haired young man finished his words, Clint's eyes flared. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and slapped his son-in-law across the face. "What are you talking about, you bastard? If my daughter wanted to sleep with that old man, you wouldn't stop her. But she clearly doesn't want to. You're giving your bride away on your wedding night. Are you even a fucking human being?" The sudden slap knocked out 2 of the young man's teeth, and his right cheek immediately swelled up. Suffering this unprovoked attack, the young man felt a sense of aggrieved. How could a tenant farmer change the laws set by the Lord? Moreover, as a French laborer, his parents had come this far. His grandfather and grandmother had also come this far. Remember this: you 2 have already worshipped the Holy Lord, and you are now my son-in-law. A Viking son-in-law can bleed and die, but he must not be a sissy. Shaking, The chestnut-haired young man covered his cheek as he trembled as he told the entire story. Clint finally understood the reasoning with the help of the people around him. When the effeminate son-in-law escorted his bride from the church to the Lord's castle, Elena, though reluctant, felt that this was the price of marrying a Frenchman. Biting her lip, the girl followed the maid into the Lord's chambers. Unexpectedly, André Jarvin was in a foul mood that day. He and two of his male companions whipped the poor girl. Elena finally couldn't stand it anymore, so she stabbed one of them with her sword and fled. Then came the long chase. Clint reached out and grasped the axe. Only the cold axe could temporarily calm his burning blood. My daughter, brought into the room like a whore, then beaten for no reason, such a beast dares to call himself a civilized man. I'm damned. Clint couldn't calm his pounding heart. He smashed the table in front of him with a fist. Simply killing 20 knights wouldn't quell his fury. Since the Lord was the instigator, he must pay for it. You, bring me some of the papyrus you usually use for talismans, the master raged. Although the servants couldn't understand the Viking language, they could easily recognize a face twisted with anger. A stack of papyrus was placed before the old man. He reached for a knife and, without a word, slashed his palm. Blood flowed crimson. He pressed his old hand against the paper, drawing a terrifying bloody handprint. You, go to the 10,000 sharks farm in the north and fetch 10,000 sharks Ivanovich. You, go to the secret plantation in the east and fetch Wolf Eye Secret. You, go to the salt pans by the sea and fetch that bastard Samji. Hurry, go now. I want to see those beasts on my farm within the hour. 5 bloody handprints were distributed among 5 servants. As they mounted their horses and fled the farm, Clint re-entered the cave. He removed his old friend's belongings from the stone table and snatched off the bearskin covering them. He forcefully flipped open the lid of the sarcophagus, revealing a gleaming black iron axe in the firelight. It was the very weapon forged from the obsidian Loki had retrieved from the sleeping city. Wielding this weapon, Clint has slain Viking mountaineers, Slavic beastmen, English cavalrymen, and even, in Asgard, a considerable number of otherworldly monsters. Today, this axe will be stained with the blood of French nobles. He yanked the axe with all his might, donning the heavy bearskin robe. All the bloody memories of his long life returned to Clint's mind simultaneously. I still can't get used to the life of a noble lord, so might as well kill as much as I can. I'll stop trying, just write a few pictures and post them directly. Chapter 352 Reinforcements arrive. Clint had fought his entire life, so he knew exactly how to execute a killing blow. Charging single-handedly into enemy territory, fueled by a surge of passion, might seem heroic, but it certainly wouldn't happen in the real world. In the forest, a lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. Even a small-scale fight can be easily won with companionship. Having lived to the age of 62, Clint understood this principle well. Most Vikings were illiterate, forcing them to rely on primitive methods of communication. In Viking culture, the bloody handprint signified danger. When seen in the woods, it signaled the presence of wild beasts. When seen in a city, it signified the presence of an enemy. When printed on paper or cloth and passed to an ally, it signaled the need for assistance. After the victory in the Viking War against the English Isles, Loki had 2,000 survivors. Clint wasn't the most powerful of the group. But when it came to who had served House Starlag the longest, Clint Fuayuki came out on top. For many Vikings who followed Loki into battle, Old Man Clint was a living fossil, having witnessed their father's birth and their son's death in battle. No one would dare ignore his call to arms. Just half an hour later, the first wave of Viking reinforcements had already stormed through the village gates. This was the owner of Wancha Farm, the closest farm to Clint's, Wancha Ivanovich. It was a name with a distinctly Slavic tone. Wancha and Clint had known each other since childhood, for a simple reason. Wancha was a Slavic infant that Clint had personally captured from a Slavic village when he, in his youth, accompanied the old village chief, Mengus Starlag, on his raids eastward. Clint raised him until he was 12, teaching him hunting, martial arts, and the ways of survival. Only after he completed his manhood trials, received the warrior's armband from Mengus, and was granted a woman, did he move out of his home. In Viking society, this relationship was called a bloodfather, Lord Bloodfather. I'm here with my men. Wancha was 36 years old this year. Unlike Clint, whose friends and relatives had all perished in the war, Wancha had far better luck. Despite having experienced numerous wars, nearly half of his childhood friends had survived. After victory, They petitioned Loki to consolidate their lands and, with their respective gold and silver, to build a castle roughly the same size as Coldwater Keep. England's mild winters allowed construction to continue without delay. After a winter, the magnificent wooden castle was nearly complete. The 5 brothers each moved into their own rooms, and with servants and a sufficient staff of farmhands, they lived a comfortable life. Coldwater Village had a population of only 170, so everyone knew each other. Upon seeing the blood hand order from Lord Bloodfather, everyone in Wansham Manor jumped out of their beds, not even bothering to eat breakfast before rushing over. Only after rushing into the village and seeing Old Man Clint unharmed did he breathe a sigh of relief. Over the next hour, a second and third reinforcement force arrived. They were Sanji, a carpenter from the coastal village of Hanshu, and a fisherman who ran a fish farm. Since Loki conquered his new homeland, Sanji's craftsmanship had surpassed that of the Mercian artisans. In the impoverished Scandinavian peninsula, he was a skilled craftsman, but in his new homeland, even a Mercian apprentice was far more skilled in carpentry than him. Sanji was immediately out of work. However, as one of the first carpenters to follow Loki into the Empire, Sanji was not forgotten. Knowing his passion for shipbuilding, Loki gifted him a large seaside mansion, along with 30 acres of salt pans and 400 salt workers to ensure his livelihood. It was a lucrative position. In all of Normandy, Loki had only established such a salt pan. After the salt was dried, Sanji could sell it directly to Loki, who would then resell it to other towns. After careful consideration, Loki decided to hand over this lucrative business to Sanji. The reason was simple: Sanji was a simple man, unseeking power or wealth, his sole passion in life being shipbuilding. He could have instantly embraced the life of a wealthy young man by following his wealthy father out to sea, but despite Ulfgar's persuasion, Sanji remained unwavering, determined to continue serving Loki. Loki realized that while other pirates might become ambitious as their wealth grew, Sanji was unlikely to do so. As Loki had anticipated, the honest old carpenter immediately hired 10 Mercian craftsmen as apprentices, starting from scratch. He built a dockyard and spent his days busying himself with a clatter of wooden ships, finding himself quite happy. Seeing the bloody handprint, Sanji assumed Clint's farm had been attacked, so he immediately mobilized all the salt farmers in the estate who knew how to wield swords. By this point, Old Man Clint had gathered nearly 200 men. 50 Vikings plus 150 English thugs. For a village fight, this was a formidable force. But he was still waiting. Wolf-Eye Sickard hadn't appeared yet. Wolf-Eye Sickard was the tribune of this border. This position, established by Loki after the 7 kingdoms of England, dates back to ancient Rome. In the Middle Ages, the sparse populations and vast wastelands of the western continent prevented them from constructing beacon towers along their borders like the Tang dynasty in the east. Therefore, rulers typically required the farmers closest to the border to clear a piece of land as a temporary garrison for border guards. The lord was responsible for the guards' daily supplies and all logistical support. Of course, no work is done in vain. This lord would also be granted an official position, enjoying privileges accorded to the nobility. A tribune was just such an official position. At the border between Salt County and Cloud Province, a tribune was posted every 100 kilometers. The tribune near Old Man Clint was called Wolf-Eye Sickard. He was a chosen one of the mountain giants. His cotton plantation was permanently stationed with 500 light cavalrymen, responsible for border patrol. Although only 100 of these were Vikings, this was still a significant force. Furthermore, Sickard and his brothers were extremely powerful. 62 years of combat experience had taught him that even a lion would fight a rabbit with all its might. These French bastards might seem weak, but their ability to survive on this continent for so long must be a testament to their true abilities. The brothers who had fought alongside Loki had finally risen to prosperity. Since they followed him into battle, he at least had to ensure their safety. Time ticked by, and finally, the sound of horse hooves echoed across the horizon. From the watchtower, Clint saw a long line of heavily armed, lightly armored cavalry approaching from the distant mountains. However, the one leading the charge, bearing the banner, was not Sickard. Why did this young man look so familiar? Chapter 353 Alfred. Old Master Clint never imagined that when he dispatched his men to gather reinforcements, they would instead summon a big shot he hadn't even considered. It was none other than Duke Loki's 15-year-old adopted son, Alfred. "Your Highness, what brings you here?" Clint approached him and gave him a hearty hug. This was a common Viking greeting. To answer Uncle Clint, my adoptive father has returned to Storm's End on official business, and my adoptive mother is pregnant and can't travel. I was bored in the Rainfall Heights, so I took the brothers from the non-commissioned officer school out for a spin. 5 months later, Alfred's constant mingling with Vikings and Slavs had led to rapid improvement in his 2 languages. Unlike the crude and unruly Viking youth, he possessed a certain civilized aura. The attentive young man was already familiar with all the key members of Coldwater Village who served Loki. Of these, he naturally remembered Old Master Clint, the most senior. At his adoptive father's wedding, he'd seen the old butler, Wentsoff, address the old man as sir. Even Baron Sartre was addressed as boy. This man must be a significant figure. Your Highness, your horses aren't. Clint paused, noticing Alfred's slightly awkward smile in the sunlight, and stopped short. Loki wasn't a hands-off Lord of Buchenbush. If he were in the castle, he wouldn't have let a group of teenagers ride horses across the province, even close to the border of Normandy. These children were the descendants of the English centurions and captains of the Rainfall Heights. If anything went wrong while they were out having fun, the responsibility would likely fall on the Duke. King Buchenbush once said that young men must be severely beaten every once in a while, otherwise they will inevitably lose their lives on the battlefield. This round of the Asgard hunting season has ended. My foster father left for Scandinavia without us, but the non-commissioned officer school at the Rainfall Highlands Church School can't be idle. I'm helping my men get acquainted with the horses and letting them experience the harsh, open-air combat experience. On the way, we saw a brother holding a bloody handprint. Upon inquiry, we learned that a battle had broken out at Clint's farm. Without further ado, all 70 reserve cavalry captains from my youth training camp are here to reinforce. We await your command. Clint frowned slightly. He recruited only skilled warriors, knowing that without the involvement of monsters like dragons and cyclops, the Vikings, seasoned in countless battles at Frostwater Village, would easily crush these armor-embroidered French knights. Meanwhile, Alfred led a group of immature English cavalrymen, aged 15 to 18. Most of them came from powerful families. These nobles, survivors of the war, hoped to convince Loki of their complete loyalty to the Duke of Normandy. These children, raised in luxury, couldn't even handle a horse, let alone a sword. Many of them didn't even know how to ride. Having followed Sikord's army all the way here, nearly half of them were already panting under the weight of their heavy armor. Such soldiers, let alone fighting, were doubtful if they could even safely ride a horse back and forth. Not to mention the potential troubles Duke Loki would face if they died at his hands. No, Your Highness, I speak the truth, don't be unwilling to listen. Although the combat capabilities of those French sissies are very average, they are holding more than toys after all. You are still a bunch of children, you can't intervene in the adults' battle yet. After single-handedly slaughtering 20 French knights, Clint's body was still stained with fresh blood, even though he wiped his face when he returned home. He casually dismissed Alfred and turned to plan a battle with Wolf-Eye Sikord. However, the tenacious young man stood up again. Master Clint, I won't leave. Through this winter, I have seen the huge gap between the English and the Vikings. In Scandinavia, 8-year-old Viking children have to practice how to kill pheasants when they can just lift their axes. The strong ones in the tribe can even enter the sacred mountain and fight hungry wolves alone at the age of 12. And what about us? Our children can't graduate from church schools until they are 15. In school, we learn mathematics, grammar, and that useless theology. That's why the English are slaughtered like chickens on the battlefield. My foster father is right. From the moment we became a country, there is no distinction between the English and Vikings in the Normandy region. Everyone must take up arms together to protect our territory. The reserve knights around me have never even seen blood. How can they protect this country? It's a rare opportunity to really participate in the battle today. Even if half of us die on the battlefield, the remaining half will complete the transformation and become real warriors. The soldiers were most seriously affected by the lords. Clint had no idea what exactly happened after Alfred followed Buchenbush into Asgard. But the 15-year-old was clearly on the verge of becoming a Slavic king. From a Viking's perspective, Alfred's words were undeniably true. Schools could only train skilled swordsmen, but transforming them into true warriors was a difficult task. Vikings, on the other hand, didn't have to worry about that. From birth, their lives were spent in slaughter, hunger, and cold. Those unable to adapt to the harsh conditions were eliminated in various ways, while those who survived, tempered by the harsh environment, became formidable warriors. In this tribe, Every 8-year-old boy was required to take up arms and fight pheasants. Without the ability to defeat the ferocious pheasants of the Skybreak Mountains, they didn't deserve to survive and continue wasting food. The immature young men behind Alfred had clearly never seen blood. Since they were prepared to die in battle, Clint could say nothing more. The strict medieval hierarchy made Alfred, known as the Prince, supreme commander of all present. Even the Viking tribune, Wolf-I Sigurd, was at his beck and call, not to mention the unofficial Clint Fuayuki. Alfred's respect for him was a gift of dignity. He couldn't ignore the vast class gap between them and exploit their seniority. After all, everything he possessed, including his life, was bestowed upon him by Alfred's adoptive father, Loki. Chapter 354, Past Events in England. Born from adversity, the Vikings possessed an unparalleled capacity for mobilization. Within 2 hours of Clint issuing the Blood Hand order, a force of nearly 1,000 men had gathered on Clint's farm. Among them were 50 household slaves led by Wolf-I Sigurd and 500 Normandy border guards. 70 reserve cavalry officers led by Alfred. 20 apprentices and 80 salt farmers led by Sanji Marish, the seafaring fisherman Fisekla and his 70 ship slaves, and 200 thugs led by Wansha Ivanovich and his brothers. According to ancient Viking rites, fighting within a village was forbidden. Therefore, conflicts between villagers could be resolved by the Lord. However, if a villager was assaulted by an outsider, the Lord's consent was unnecessary. The outsider could be slaughtered at will. In the eyes of the Viking Lord, outsiders were not equal to people. Clint Fuayuki was a veteran warrior, his blood burning with fighting spirit. Ever since he discovered his daughter had been assaulted, he hadn't considered relying on the Lord to solve his problem. That was cowardly behavior. He'd do it with his hands, not his words. He wouldn't bother the Lord with a problem he could handle himself. When all the reinforcements arrived, Clint said nothing more. Everyone present had grown up under his watch, so there was no need for him to express gratitude. The soldiers marched into the manor in formation, each receiving 2 days' worth of rations from the kitchen. Then, silently, they mounted their horses and charged out the farm gate. Had a lifelong, law-abiding English farmer ever witnessed such a scene? Simply because his daughter was injured, not even killed, the Lord personally chopped down 20 pursuers with his axe, then instantly summoned an army. Even more outrageous, this casually summoned force looked even larger than the Blood Pigeon clan's invasion 2 years prior. Could they really dare to launch a massacre in Yun province? What good would it do to provoke those arrogant French? The old butler watched with trepidation as the murderous warriors marched out of the gate. At times, he longed to call out to the white-haired old man and explain to him just how powerful the French were in this land. However, he doubted the illiterate old warrior would listen to a word. On the vast grasslands of the northern continent, jackals and vultures didn't need to hunt. They simply followed the powerful lions and scavenged the scraps they left behind to thrive. It was precisely because of this unique dependency that, over millennia, the jackal's teeth and claws grew ever shorter, and they evolved a yellow-brown pattern. This allowed them to better conceal themselves in the yellow grasslands of the northern continent. Darwin's law dictated that they didn't need to evolve any hunting abilities. Learning to remain low-key in front of the lions was enough to survive. Taking the initiative would only lead to their own deaths. The same was true for every small nation that depended on a larger power for survival. In terms of sheer area, the Duchy of France was more than twice the size of the 7 kingdoms of the English Isles combined. Its population was over 10 times that of the 7 combined. Whether in terms of population, military, national strength, or wealth, the French duchy was more than capable of crushing England. This was even when all 7 kingdoms were combined. Geographically, the French duchy also had a distinct advantage. For all the goods from the English Isles to reach the civilized world, France was a behemoth that could not be circumvented. Like a giant hand, it blocked England's access to the Mediterranean. If England and France fell out, the English Channel would be paralyzed. Not to mention the devastation of war. Simply to import and export goods from the islands, English merchants would have to sail around the entire Visigothic Free City, reaching the Mediterranean through the distant Strait of Gibraltar. This round trip would add nearly a month to the sea voyage. Medieval ships were not exactly known for their safety and reliability. The seas were full of accidents. A single misstep could send a ship sinking, destroying both cargo and crew. Not to mention the numerous pirates near the Visigothic Free City. Even formidable merchants like the Tang dynasty, knowing that crossing the east-west land bridge was no longer safe after the Anlushan rebellion, still outnumbered merchants tenfold by land compared to those traveling by sea. They sought safety. The French were not to be provoked. All 7 English monarchs were well aware of this ironclad rule. Consequently, the French had become accustomed to pampering themselves in the English Isles. Their ability to walk with their noses raised high stemmed from a minor incident 12 years prior. 12 years earlier, a French nobleman of poverty, while visiting Canterbury Cathedral in the Kingdom of Kent, gazed upon the golden apples dedicated to saints within the cathedral. Unsupervised, he secretly removed one to examine it. The apple was only the size of a palm, but this was no hollow golden shell, it was a heavy, solid golden sphere. The seemingly small apple, held in his palm, felt like a heavy lead ball. The nobleman had simply intended to play with it. Upon discovering the item weighed a staggering 10 taels, he, obsessed with a treasure, stuffed the golden apple into his arms. This was utterly foolish. Canterbury, as the religious heart of England, was home to long-standing Crusader presence. The relics enshrined in the church, all ancient artifacts dating back to ancient Greece, possessed immense artistic value. Upon discovering the missing tribute, the Crusaders immediately sealed the church and imprisoned everyone inside. The next day, the French noble was discovered to be the thief of the relics. Stealing offerings from the gods in a church carries only one fate, burning at the stake. The thief, caught with the culprit, confessed before the bishop. Just as the Crusaders were setting up the cross for the execution, the French ambassador's servants arrived. Chapter 355, Past Events in England. The French ambassador was based in Southampton, the capital of the Kingdom of Wessex. As one of the most distinguished individuals on the island, he was not one to venture out easily, let alone to such a remote region as the Kingdom of Kent. A servant brought the ambassador's order, demanding that King Lanshor of Kent remove the shackles and release the prisoners. Lanshor, with a solemn expression, summoned the Archbishop of Canterbury to the royal city for negotiations. Lady Evans had long known that this man was merely a viscount from a long-declined family, and she suspected that the Plantagenets would not take such a marginal figure seriously. Therefore, she refused to compromise and resolutely carried out the judgment. Your Excellency, on behalf of the ambassador, I ask you again, are you truly not going to release him? The servant asked with a hint of amusement. Don't say I didn't remind you, even though this man is poor and downtrodden, his knighthood was personally conferred by our king. No one below the royal authority has the right to judge a French knight. Therefore, I ask you one last time, are you truly not going to release him? As the supreme propagator of the faith in the English Isles, Lady Evans of the Silent Sisterhood has never been intimidated. As a demigod-level powerhouse of the path of faith, in her heart, the Pope reigns supreme. No one dares to desecrate the tributes offered by mortals to the gods. Furthermore, the French nobles have been rampant in the English Isles for a long time, now even daring to enter a sacred place like Canterbury Cathedral and openly steal the golden tribute. It would be fine if the ambassador came in person. How could the Pope maintain his dignity after being threatened by a servant and then surrendered? Without a word, Letty turned and walked away. A French servant, dressed in finery, smiled after her and shouted, "Bishop, I admire your adherence to your principles. I hope you will remain true to your original intention and let all of us witness the brilliance of the Archbishop of Canterbury. If you can hold out for 10 days, you will have achieved a great victory." A burst of laughter echoed throughout the Kentish palace. The bishop is truly trustworthy. Nothing is more satisfying than seeing the proud French suffer a setback. However, just 3 days later, the same laughing nobles shed their smiles and replaced them with heavy masks of pain. White doves flew to Paris, announcing the impending execution of the impoverished nobles. The next morning, the French duchy across the English Channel immediately blocked all English ships from entering its port. Seeing the agricultural produce, fruit, and meat on board spoiling, English merchants were forced to sail to the neighboring free Visigothic city. Yet, even the Visigothic city-states, long renowned for their liberty and enlightenment, could not afford to provoke the powerful French duchy. The reason was simple. France had superior substitutes for all of England's exports: wheat, fruit, wine, cheese, spices. In the eyes of Visigothic merchants, English merchants held a lower status than even Vikings. After all, the Vikings possessed precious whale oil, sealskins, and cold-weather leathers, products for which no civilized society in the Western continent could substitute. Meanwhile, English merchants' goods were merely commonplace. Even if the entire English Isles sank to the seabed overnight, the lives of the French, Visigoths, and Bavarians would not be significantly affected. Export bans were only one aspect of the solution. Another aspect involved raising export tariffs. France's independence from England did not mean England's independence from France. The high-quality steel, glass, pigments, graphite, papyrus, tea, and other commodities that the English needed daily and could not produce on their own, necessarily, had to be shipped to France via the Byzantine Empire and then transported across the English Channel to England. The day after the French blockade of the Channel, merchants, sensing the impending crisis, began hoarding supplies. Prices for essential goods like steel, glass, and tea skyrocketed in Wessex shops. 3 days later, prices were so low they were practically unavailable. Furious, Egbert summoned King Ranshor of Kent. During this conversation, which will never be recorded in history books, he uttered a crucial message. In everyone's life, there are bound to be moments when he needs to act like a grandson. As the rulers of these islands, we can call the wind and rain. However, when facing the Plantagenet family, even if the other party is a servant delivering a message, they can still make us miserable. Similarly, the Plantagenet family shows off their power in front of us, but when facing the Byzantine King Michael III, they also have to bow their heads and kiss his shoes, because the Silk Road ends in Constantinople. All the East China Sea goods they sell are distributed from the general merchants in Constantinople to other Mediterranean countries. Can Michael III stand up straight and make money forever? He can't either, because on the east-west continental bridge there is the Abbasid family that rules the Arab Empire. Further away, there is the Tangli family, the ruler of the Tang dynasty in the east. He can't afford to offend either of these two giants. Lan Shaor's face was ashen. He wanted to speak, but he couldn't say anything. The bastard you locked up only stole a golden apple, which was worth only 10 ounces of silver. You had 1,000 ways to get it back, but you chose the dumbest one. You chose to burn that bastard on a cross. I'm so fucking mad. If you were really so angry, could you have hired an assassin to kill him in secret and then announce his death? Do you have to tell the world, a thief has appeared among the French nobility? You're going to slap the Plantagenets in the face. Now, they've closed the sea. The fleets of our 7 nations, plus the scarce goods, have lost business opportunities worth at least 10,000 golden apples. Have you figured this out? Lanshor didn't reply, for he truly had nothing to say. The next day, he released the impoverished nobleman. But even so, the Duchy of France didn't let the English off the hook. They used this as an opportunity to permanently raise tariffs on 17 in-demand commodities, with the highest increase reaching 7%. Because of this, English merchants had to pay an additional £30,000 in purchase costs each year. And all of this stemmed from the hand that always hung around their necks, the Duchy of France, the Plantagenet family. Chapter 356 The Sudden War. 12 years ago, driven by a desire to save face, the Plantagenets needed no troops or war. Simply by blockading the ports, they could have destroyed all 7 kingdoms of England. And now, 20 French soldiers laid it on their own farm. True, they were pursuing the Lord's adopted daughter. But she was merely an adopted commoner, of humble origin, a nobody in the kingdom. Mercia, fresh from a war, had no shortage of orphans. With the Viking lord's wealth, he could find countless beautiful girls for his household. English, French, Visigoths, Slavs, the choice was his. Countless young women yearned for the leap from farmhand to aristocratic status. As long as they had money to spend, they cared little for whoever became their father. When the land and property were divided, Wenzoff, knowing that old Clint had a wild temper, assigned him a dedicated steward. Watching the cavalry trudging through the snow toward Yun province, the old butler suddenly felt a surge of dizziness. Could it be that they truly intended to kill the André Jarvin of Yun province? André Jarvin was a completely different person from the impoverished French nobleman of 12 years ago. André was not only a successful businessman, but also had close ties to the Plantagenet family. He was the exclusive flour supplier for the Grand Palais in Paris. 7 generations of his ancestors specialized in flour delivery, cuttings, and hybridization. In terms of flour knowledge, no one in the Western continent could match the Jarvin family. The Grand Palais daily flour expenses depended entirely on him. André was the only merchant, even among the lower-ranking nobles like the Baron, to be allowed into the palace each year to spend Christmas with the Plantagenet family. While seemingly a monarch and a subject, he and the French royal family were actually close friends. It was precisely because of this connection that, when André discovered the white cloud night blossoming in the White Cloud Valley, He finally saw the perfect green leaf of his dreams. He offered to lease the entire Cloud province, and Ulysses, after a brief moment of deliberation, agreed without hesitation. By becoming closer to him, Andre could at least offer Mercia some assistance for the sake of Cloud province should he ever truly fall out with Wessex. This distinguished guest, treated like a god by the entire kingdom, was instantly mobilized by these unruly Vikings simply for injuring an ordinary woman. Even more terrifying, Master Fuyuki wasn't the only madman among the Vikings. Of all the helpers he summoned, no one objected. No one raised an objection. No one even asked how many enemies there were, what their equipment was, or what their nationality was. They all launched into a potentially catastrophic battle as if they were picking a few cabbages. In just 10 minutes, the 1,000-man force had vanished into the mountains. The old steward descended from the watchtower at the farm gate. He knitted his brows and wrote a secret letter to Seawatch Fortress. A group of illiterate people, including a 15-year-old child, didn't understand the gravity of the situation. But the Duke of Seawatch, Phoenix Coldstone, who lived in Seawatch Fortress, had grown up in Constantinople. He should understand the severity of the situation. Hopefully, Baron Andre Jarvan will still be alive by the time the carrier pigeon arrives. My Lord Bloodfather, did you drink the sugarcane wine I sent you over Christmas? As Clint galloped, Wancha followed him, just as he had followed the old man on his sea raids as a child. Haha. Christmas, just because Duke Loki respects the holy bishop and his group of priests doesn't mean I have to support these mourning-clad nerds. I have no interest in participating in their Christmas celebrations. I only recognize one festival, Midsummer, bestowed upon us by God King Odin. But then again, the sugarcane wine you sent me is quite good. In terms of civilization, Scandinavia was far inferior to England. The Vikings had only one festival throughout the year, and given their poverty, they could only afford one, Midsummer's Day in early June. On this day, Scandinavia experienced its brightest night. Legend has it that the gods of Valhalla lit their braziers and began brewing their finest wine. The arrival of the White Knights signaled the end of the long winter. The snow had completely melted, and the peasant women could finally dig through the frozen soil and sow wheat and corn. However, in the prosperous civilization of England, its strong national strength and fertile land allowed its residents to enjoy more gatherings. Christmas, Advent, Easter, Lent, Carnival. Every month of the year, a gathering is held by the church, bringing residents together and spreading the glory of the Holy Lord. A love of excitement and good food is a universal human trait. Unlike old men like Clint, who find it difficult to change their lifestyle, the younger ones, Wancha, Faith, and Sanji, have embraced a new life in their new territory. They have integrated far more seamlessly with the English world than the cold-tempered old man Clint. Duke Loki is truly a reincarnated god. He's truly lived up to his promise and brought us into a brand new paradise. Everything about this place is great, except there's no one to kill. It's a bit unpleasant, said the carpenter Sanji. Haha, even an old carpenter feels itchy after 6 months of not killing, doesn't he? Haha. Let alone us brothers who have just gained power. Last summer, slaughtering those Cyclops in Stonehelm was a once-in-a-century hunting extravaganza. I bet Odin is watching us from the sky. Wancha patted his chest and laughed wildly. Hey, by the way, how are we going to kill the real culprit after we catch him? I heard it's a French baron. How? That's obvious. He dared to attack our Master Clint's adopted daughter. Of course, we'll turn him into Blood Eagle and hang him up. Blood Eagle, that's a craft. Do you know how to do it? You've never seen pigs run before, so today's a good time to practice with this old thing. In the 1,000-man column, over 100 Vikings ran at the front. Behind them were over 800 servants, thugs, and a border guard made up of English. The English were far less unruly than the Vikings. They rejected the idea of waging war without cause. But if it meant killing the French, they wouldn't mind. French merchants had been bullying the English Isles for a long time. Now, these evildoers had finally attracted an even more ferocious demon to torment them. The English soldiers rubbed their hands, ready to enjoy the spectacle. At the rear of the column stood Alfred's 70 reserve cavalry captains. At the front of the column, the Vikings chatted about family matters, like a quiet nightly conversation by the fire. Their relaxed nature greatly eased the tension of the young men. But war is war after all. When White Cloud Valley appeared ahead, the gates closed tightly, and a deep horn blew. At the forefront, Wolf-Eyes Sickard leaped from his horse, roaring and transforming into a giant. He casually uprooted a nearby stout tree and hurled it at the carved steel gate. The iron gate, barely a centimeter thick, shattered instantly. 1,000 cavalrymen charged straight into White Cloud Valley. Chapter 357. The killing begins. The White Cloud Knight is not an easy flower to cultivate. Cultivating this pure white rose from the wild to long-lasting bloom and stable production required immense effort from the Jarvan family. After leasing the entire province, Andrei conscripted nearly 30,000 English residents to move in. These people weren't hired by the Jarvan family, they came voluntarily. Anyone who has lived in civilized society for a long time understands the saying, "It's nice to find shade under a big tree." The English will always be inferior to the French master. Furthermore, the commission offered by Master Andrei was indeed very generous. Of the 30,000 residents, approximately 20,000 lived around the White Cloud Valley. Their job was to cultivate a strangely shaped, clustered black bean. This wasn't food for humans, but an ancient plant that had survived for millennia. The Jarvan family, florists for generations, believed that the black bean would absorb any unwanted color from the soil, enhancing the purity of the pure white flowers. When Clint Fuyuki led a cavalry charge, smashing through the gate and charging into White Cloud Valley, the farm hands wielding their hoes in the field straightened their backs. Everyone squinted, unable to believe what they were seeing. An army had actually stormed into Yun province? And it looked like it was heading straight for Master Andrei's castle? The farmers stood frozen in their tracks. Equally bewildered were the French mercenaries tasked with securing the valley. Andrei, though a baron, held the title, but he possessed no fiefdom. In the French duchy, lack of fiefdom meant no recruitment grounds, making it impossible to train a military of their own. The Jarvan family had to resort to the merchant method of hiring troops from their homeland and bringing them to Yun province to guard their homes. Mercenaries differed significantly from professional soldiers. Their goal wasn't to kill or injure anyone, as their targets were often bandits or farm hands. Simply put, they could afford to bully the common people working in the fields. If a real battle ever came, these guys wouldn't be trusted at all. Moreover, Andrei had long since realized that in this land, the French were the English's fathers. Let alone invading Yun province, most armies would rather avoid it, even if they chose a longer route. They feared accidentally injuring an English mercenary and causing unnecessary trouble. The mercenaries in Yun province had a sole duty, whipping farmers who didn't work hard. They were far more familiar with whips than swords, because, as far as punishment was concerned, swords were forbidden. The cavalry Clint had brought with him was the first army he had seen since renting the province. Odin's people. The time for slaughter has arrived. Isn't it true that you've all remembered our traditional ways of fighting? Roar. The Vikings following Clint roared, their axes drawn. They dismounted and strode into the fields. They paid no attention to the farmers, their legs shaking like shattered straw. Their only target was the overseers, wielding broadswords. The Vikings slaughtered their villages without formation or discipline. Everyone dispersed through the village, each hacking down their prey and looting the dead. The weak were unworthy to survive the Vikings. If they encountered a tougher opponent, they would bravely ascend to Valhalla in battle. The slaughter began without warning. Old Man Clint dismounted without pause. The heavy bear hide weighed 30 kilograms, his only trusted armor on the battlefield. Ever since he personally slew a nearly 3-ton brown bear in Slavic territory at the age of 18, Clint had worn it. The brown bear, a tenacious survivor of the cold taiga, was no less defensive than a fully armored cavalryman. The heavy hide, nearly an inch thick, was covered in long, silky hair as fine as steel needles. The glossy fur greatly absorbed the force of the blow, not to mention providing superior insulation to any fabric. He wore 2 hatchets at his belt, and a broad-bladed axe slung across his shoulder. For over 50 years as a pirate, he had appeared in this image across the Slavic lands. The howling of agony rose and fell from the fields, but the old man gazed at the horizon, his eyes fixed only on the towering castle rising above the valley. England boys, follow me and Sanji, we can at least take care of your safety. Remember, these are half-grown children who haven't even killed a chicken. Even though these French bastards are no stronger than pheasants in the Skybreak Mountains, if possible, let's try to bring them back alive. Alfred had lived for 15 years, his entire life in civilized society. Even when he entered Asgard 2 months ago, he had wielded a broadsword to fight monsters. Last summer, Wessex had deployed nearly every army in the kingdom, but Egbert hadn't led him into battle. He had never witnessed a bloody battles of the living. The Vikings didn't even exchange a single word with the French mercenaries. They strode forward, then swung their axes, hacking them to pieces, sword and all. As they fell, they snatched wallets from the corpses, the entire process as natural as eating or drinking. By Odin. These chickens have gold in their pockets, these wimps are so rich, brothers, kill them. The English peasants began to flee frantically. But the Vikings didn't try to stop them, instead leaving a wide escape route. Their experience had taught them that even sheep, in sufficient numbers, could be a formidable force. Tens of thousands of tenant farmers worked the fields, while the Viking army numbered only 1,000. If they were pushed hard enough, simply wearing out their physical strength could wear down this small force. Moreover, the farmhands, dressed in rags, clearly showed they were poor. This battle wouldn't last long. The battle-hardened old man, Clint, was well aware of this, so he and Sanji led hundreds of English warriors directly into the castle. However, at the narrow entrance to White Cloud Valley, he encountered the true defenses of the French nobles. 10 Pegasus knights soared through the air, and 4 or 5 griffins proudly stood atop the cliffs, neighing incessantly. However, the most striking element of this force was the 6 figures blocking the pass. Among them, a corpulent giant, sitting cross-legged and cramming food into his mouth, stood out. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 358, Waitrose 6 Sequence. Among the nations of the Western continent, the French nobility possessed a unique mindset. For generations, they had inhabited an incredibly fertile land, blessed with immense divine gifts. Without needing to work, they amassed wealth 10 times greater than anyone else. Even compared to Constantinople, Paris could be considered the Western continent's trading capital. Not only farmers, but merchants and nobles alike profited immensely from this land. After centuries of commerce, they discovered that relying on commerce seemed more effective than the resource-intensive war of war. Over time, the citizens of the French duchy developed a certain extravagance. Take, for example, their proud Order of the Dragon, Order of the Pegasus, and Order of the Griffin. The absence of war meant that these beasts, normally requiring immense resources to maintain, could only soar over the city on holidays to entertain the people. The French kept these rare and exotic beasts not so much to protect their homeland as to flaunt France's might. The same was true of their selection of chosen ones. The proud French simply disdained to employ highly skilled and cost-effective guards like the saber-toothed mercenaries and Visigoth mercenaries. Why? Because the other nobles of the Western continent were using them. If I were to employ these illiterate guards, completely unaware of the mysteries of romance, how would I truly stand out? When it came to selecting bodyguards and personal guards, the billionaire French nobles still prioritized collection and show-off, finding a follower of the ancient god, a remnant from antiquity like Iphitus, to constantly be at their side would be a dazzling topic of conversation at drinking parties and gatherings. Gathering a complete troop of chosen ones under the command of an ancient god would be far more prestigious than any noble status. However, in today's human civilization, new gods reign supreme, and the glory of the ancient gods has long faded. It's rare for a fortunate individual to obtain a single ancient god's inheritance. Assembling all the paths of a chosen one under an ancient god isn't simply a matter of money. Like collecting artifacts, it requires a great deal of luck. André Jarvin is a French merchant with exceptional luck. The 6 individuals guarding the Valley Pass are none other than the chosen ones of the ancient Indian Vedic cult, representing the heaven path, the human path, the Ashura path, the animal path, the hungry ghost path, and the hell path. These 6 individuals perfectly cover the entire sequence of paths within the Vedic cult. André is the only person in the entire French duchy who could accomplish such a feat. During the Dark Middle Ages, ancient India was always a unique nation. First and foremost, its geography was key. India rests on the towering Himalayas, and is surrounded by the vast ocean. The unique geographical environment made this land quite isolated in the early days of civilization. 3,000 years ago, when navigation was still relatively undeveloped, the ancient Rakkhanta people inhabited this land. They worshipped an extremely ancient deity, Kashyapa, the lord of the creation. Kashyapa called himself the Lord of all creation. Upon first encountering the ancient deity, the Rakkhanta people knelt before him. After descending to earth, Kasyapa founded the Vedic religion, a unique sect of the ancient Indians. As a deity, he bestowed upon mortals the 6 realms of reincarnation: heaven, human, asura, animal, hungry ghost, and hell. Mortals could choose to enter the Vedic temple and enter one of these 6 realms to gain the power of either gods or demons. This was the earliest form of faith in the ancient Indian kingdom. However, the isolated land forced the 6 realms of reincarnation to fight against each other, and over time, each became familiar with the other's fighting styles. If a continent had only one temple, then the people there would likely be inbred and not very powerful. Sure enough, 1,000 years later, the Aryans arrived. Unlike the Draconians, the Aryans were a nomadic people who migrated the farthest in the last cycle of human civilization. Originating from the steppes south of the Slavic Ural Mountains, they drove their herds across vast distances, forging mountains and building ships across the sea. Around 2200 BC, they reached ancient India by sea. With them came their own faith, Brahmanism and the Trimurti. The Trimurti of 3,000 years ago were vastly different from the modern-day Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu. These 3 curry-like figures were the product of 3,000 years of civilizational convergence. In the early days of Aryan culture, they resembled the gods in Valhalla, burly white men wielding weapons. According to archaeological texts studied by scholars in Constantinople, these 3 ancient gods, 2 men and 1 woman, likely originated from Asgard, fleeing from the Aesir. Nomadic peoples often kill as they travel. A war between the Trimurti and Kasyapa, the lord of Prajapati, erupted in this ancient land. Ultimately, the Aryans, valiant and experienced in countless battles during their nomadic existence, emerged victorious. They successfully expelled the Vedic religion from the fertile lands of India. From then on, the remaining followers of Kasyapa, the lord of Prajapati, were reduced to wandering like rats across the continents, seeking the protection of merchants, lords, and nobles. Brahmanism replaced the Vedic religion 2,000 years ago. By 550 AD, when King Darius conquered all of India, Zoroastrianism immediately replaced Brahmanism, becoming the largest religious sect in the region. 350 years later, the fire cult temples erected in various cities have made Brahmanic temples dedicated to the Trimurti virtually unattainable. This, of course, goes without saying for the remnants of the Vedic cult, purged 2,000 years ago. Andrei Jarvin's ability to assemble the 6 reincarnators of the Vedic temple under these circumstances is like finding 6 living, breathing fossils. This feat is truly astonishing. These 6 rare chosen ones are the rarest exhibits in his castle, bar none. He would never have sent these 6 into battle except in dire straits. But now, their lives are at stake. He has no choice. Chapter 359 First Kill. Seeing the elite soldiers blocking the valley pass, Old Man Clint showed no sign of panic. Fis, that giant is yours, Sanji. Have your apprentices use their bows and crossbows to deal with the strange horses and birds flying overhead. Wancha, pick any 2 of the remaining monsters, and leave 2 for me. Alfred, you take care of the last one. Old Man Clint had the most combat experience among the men present, so the task of assigning tasks naturally fell to him. The 6 monsters facing them were rarely seen in the entire western continent. Although Clint didn't recognize them, since he followed Loki, they had seen many strange monsters. No matter what strange creatures they are, break their bones, chop off their heads. Brothers, charge. The Vikings rushed forward in a swarm, broadswords raised high. Among them, Alfred, with his broadsword drawn, rushed to the front. He had never killed anyone before. However, after following Bakumbush into Asgard and experiencing bloody battles with dozens of different monsters, humans no longer seemed so formidable in his eyes. He chose a brown-skinned old man among the 6, his hands behind his back and a faint smile on his face. The reason was simple: he looked the most formidable. Running at top speed, Alfred smiled and unsheathed the knight's broadsword slung across his back. The broadsword was approximately 3 feet 2 inches long, silver white, and forged from the finest Damascus steel. Inscribed in its center were 3 lines of small characters: Jehovah is our King. May you bring down the divine fire of awakening, cleanse the Pope's enemies, and purify their souls, Forger Joshua. This seemingly unremarkable knight's broadsword actually holds a remarkable story. Named Soul Breaker, it is an ancient sword at least 2,000 years old. Legend has it that this silver sword was forged personally by Joshua, the successor of the prophet Moses, using materials personally gifted by the Holy Lord Jehovah. Joshua forged a total of 7 soul-splitting blades, only this one survives. Each year, the first student to graduate from the Pantheon in Constantinople is granted an audience with a pope and personally blessed with a weapon. The silver broadsword not only never wears down, but also absorbs the soul's power as it slays its enemies, transforming it into pale flames clinging to the blade. 2,000 years ago, the holy bishops were far less charitable than they are today. In a land ravaged by the outer gods, they too endured brutal slaughter to survive. Today marks the first time this knight's broadsword has been stained with human blood. Facing the swiftly approaching Alfred, the brown-skinned old man showed no sign of panic. He simply patted the giant, who was still cramming food into his stomach, and extended a finger to the incoming foe. Sitting there blankly, the obese giant, nearly 5 meters tall, turned his head, his face dazed as he stared at the charging Vikings, his laughter shimmering with dementia. Fresh meat, Alfred continued to race, leaving the rest of the group behind and charging forward. The dazed giant stretched out his hands to grab him, but the 15-year-old boy remained undeterred. He raised his broadsword and slashed with all his might. The snow-white blade flashed like a silver chain, slicing through the giant's broad palm. The giant palm covering his head shed a thick layer of blood like a waterfall. But Alfred chose to ignore it. In a Viking formation, junior officers must obey the orders of their superiors. Even before the battle began, Old Man Clint had declared that the giant belonged to Faith Sikla. His target, from beginning to end, was the tawny old man standing with his hands behind his back. As Alfred approached, the tawny old man opened his arms, and then, he leaped into the air like a nimble kite. This man was none other than the heavenly Samsara of the 6 paths of reincarnation in the Vedic religion. Soaring into the air, he chanted ancient Sanskrit and slowly opened his hands. As his hands moved, 6 mysterious, shimmering golden balls of light converged above his head. A shower of golden light descended, making him look like an ancient, brown-skinned deity. This appearance could frighten many mortals who had never seen a true god. But it certainly couldn't frighten Alfred, who had once entered Asgard. In Asgard, flying enemies were numerous. Across the vast golden grasslands, even the most ordinary elk could spread their wings while running. How to bring down a soaring foe was the first lesson every Viking hunter needed to learn. Dragging his broadsword into the earth, Alfred reached for the lasso wrapped around his waist. With a powerful swing, the flexible lasso swung into a round circle and soared into the air, precisely ensnaring the tan-skinned old man in midair. With the combined effort of all his muscles, he instantly yanked the old man down from the sky like a bird with broken wings. An English teenager wielded the lasso with the same deftness as an old herdsman making a living on the grasslands. This stark contrast was momentarily difficult for the heavenly Deo reincarnationist to adapt to. However, knocking him down from the air was only the beginning of his attack. Pulling the knight's broadsword from its burrow into the mud, Alfred nimbly dodged 6 balls of light that flew towards him. Compared to the lightning-calling monsters of the 7 divine realms, these 6 missiles were far too slow. A cruel smile played on his face as he thrust his sword into the brown-skinned old man's heart. The decorative breastplate offered no protection against the heavy and sharp broadsword. With a soft, clanking sound, the breastplate shattered like glass as it made contact with the blade. Alfred's broadsword plunged deeply into the heavenly Deo reincarnationist's heart. The silver broadsword quickly turned a deep crimson upon contact with a beating heart and the psychic blood of the chosen one. With a soft bang, a pale flame ignited from the blade. The heavenly way reincarnationist could no longer maintain his composure. Pure white flame seared his wounds and soul, causing him to wail in unbearable agony. Within seconds, the flames engulfed his entire body, rapidly turning red, then black, and finally, he was reduced to a charred mass. Chapter 360, Hungry Ghost Wheel Protector. Since the dawn of life, the human world has never been a place where peace and prosperity could flourish. The death of any deity and the fading of faith all have deep-rooted reasons, most of which stem from weakness. 2,000 years ago, the nations of the barbaric eastern continent also relied on the power granted by the gods. Countless other gods, including the 3-legged golden crow, Hawaii, Chiao, Zuran, and Gongong, descended upon this continent, spreading their beliefs and compelling mortals to build temples for them. Although the Nuwa and Fuxi clans ultimately purged the other gods and established a monopoly, the Nuwa and Fuxi temples were also gods born from mortals. The eastern continent remained under the spell of the gods. Until 1,000 years ago, during the Warring States period, the pre-Qin philosophers Laozi, Zhuangzi, and Mozi emerged, giving rise to Taoist body cultivation methods. Strengthening the body and drawing ki into the body became prevalent on the eastern continent, rapidly replacing the worship of other gods. The fundamental reason for this was a single factor: ki cultivators were vastly superior in power to the chosen ones. In just a few hundred years, all the ancient temples on the eastern continent were either demolished or abandoned. Everyone sought to cultivate their foundations and bodies. Faith in the gods was extinguished in an instant. The same was true of the Viro cult founded by the Lord of Life, Kashyapa. The 6 reincarnators may appear to be gods and demons, but they were born in a completely isolated land, nestled between mountains and sea. They could only bully the few mortals in this isolated continent, unable to wage a true war against the other foreign gods. This faith, however powerful, was inadequate. When the Aryans and their Brahmin followers landed, they were immediately and brutally purged. And looking around the world, the Vajra monks and flying dancers of the Brahmin cult pale in comparison to the other chosen ones. Andrei Jarvan hired these 6 bodyguards, 90% because he wanted to show them off as exhibits to the world. In the 10 years that he had followed Andrei, the 6 path reincarnators had resembled 6 models, far more than 6 warriors. Despite being his first time drawing a sword, Alfred dispatched the celestial path reincarnator with just 2 strikes. The thrill of the battle had fully unleashed the rage within him. Drawing his flaming broadsword, his next target was the seemingly dumb, obese giant beside him. This was the hungry ghost reincarnator. Of the 6, only the hungry ghost reincarnator appeared stronger. At the very beginning of the battle, he had grabbed the charging Faith's claw and, opening his bloody maw, devoured him whole. Alfred could hear his desperate struggles within the giant's gut. So, after dispatching the celestial path reincarnator with 2 strikes, he backhanded a deep thrust into the giant's soft belly and tugged. The flames extinguished instantly upon contact with the thick blood. The soul breaker wasn't an indestructible weapon like the blood axe. Only when the broadsword touched a beating heart could it draw spiritual energy from it. Though the flames died, the silver sword's sharpness remained undimmed. A silky cut ripped through the soft belly. A mass of intestines and organs, mixed with blood, flowed out, and even the wriggling stomach could be seen. Faith's claw, swallowed by him, struggled desperately within. Yet, after being ripped open, the seemingly clueless giant seemed completely insensitive to pain. He reached out his massive hands and frantically stuffed the intestines back into his stomach, gently rubbing his belly. The cut healed instantly, as if glued. So that's how it is, the strange enemy didn't faze Alfred. With a deft movement of his broadsword, he backhanded it into the chest of a griffin behind him that was attempting to attack. Having slashed the heart, the soul breaker once again ignited with pale flames. Alfred drew his grappling hook and hurled it with force, encircling the giant's neck. Pulling hard on the rope, he crawled along the giant's back, his back surging with wind, and in an instant, he was standing atop him. This was the power of Stormwalker, sequence 7 of Hurricane Berserker. 2 massive hands swung, and Alfred leaped nimbly, the gusts of wind lifting his body, allowing him to remain aloft for an inordinately long time. Dodging the attack, he gripped his broadsword tightly with both hands and leaped high. The wind, mingled with raging fire, sent him soaring through the air in a vertical storm of flames. The sword pierced his forehead, severing his nose and even splitting the giant's lips vertically apart. The sloughed skin revealed cheek muscles and the teeth hidden behind them. But the ferocious attack wasn't over yet. The divine power of Stormwalker was unleashed once more, a constant stream of wind lifting his back. Alfred swung his hook again, launching a downward attack. The broadsword, blazing with pale flames, slashed through the giant's teeth, shattering both rows. He leaped onto the giant's head, stepping on its nose. The wind dissipated, and Alfred roared, stabbing the soul breaker into the giant's skull. The 4-foot silver sword pierced his brain with pinpoint accuracy. Under the searing flames, the giant let out a muffled roar. He collapsed to the ground, retching frantically. Broken organs, blood, and food, along with his swallowed Faith's claw, were vomited out. As his soft brain gradually solidified and turned to mush, the hungry ghost reincarnator also fell to his sword. Across the battlefield, Wolf-Eye Sicard was still locked in a tangle with the Azure reincarnator. Old Man Clint also wielded a flaming axe, poised to slash the animal reincarnator, transformed into a pitch-black werewolf. English thugs and reserve knight officers, armed with crossbows, blasted the Griffins and Pegasus out of range. The French guards guarding the White Cloud Valley Pass held out for less than 10 minutes before their entire line collapsed. Chapter 361, The Reappearance of the Sect Master. No matter how much wealth a merchant possesses, a vast gap remains between them and the lords. The fundamental reason is that merchants are obsessed with profit. Everything they do is driven by profit. André's dominance in French business circles stems from his exceptional skill in presenting himself. Returning to the imperial city, he entered and exited the palace as easily as he ate or drank water. When attending gatherings, he was followed by a set of reincarnators from the ancient Viro cult, drawing considerable attention wherever he went. This is both the merchants' advantage and their limitation. Having never experienced a bloody battlefield, they have no idea what true slaughter entails. This was also true of the Frostborn Duchess, Lady Coldstone, who died in Frost Ridge. "Look at my brothers around me, are they all still alive?" Wiping the blood from his face, Clint yanked the flaming axe from the dead werewolf's chest and swung it twice, dispelling the flames. The entire chest of the animal reincarnator was dented by his blows. Flying Pegasus Knights and Griffin Knights, their bodies riddled with arrows, fell around them. Compared to the decisive battle with the Kingdom of Wessex last summer, these household slaves were far less formidable. A head count revealed only one berserker, who had twisted his arm fighting the humanity reincarnator. Everyone appeared to be unharmed. Most of the overseers in the black bean fields had been hacked to pieces. The blood-soaked Vikings regrouped and entered the White Cloud Valley. Looking out, the valley lay a blanket of snow-white rose fields. The flower farmers working there weren't the farmers André had recruited from England. Each one was a skilled worker he had hired from France at great expense. He didn't care how many of the English black bean farmers outside the valley perished, but he couldn't afford to lose even a single one of these skilled workers. Seeing the Vikings unstoppable, André retreated to the castle. The castle gates at the end of the valley were shut tight, a drawbridge pulled up from the moat, and the castle was densely packed with crossbowmen and militiamen. Facing the sea of white flowers, Clint looked around and uttered 3 words. Burn. Like locusts, 1,000 of his men uprooted the thriving roses in the valley, leaving their thick roots exposed to the sun. The Vikings knew no such things as romance. In their society, men pleased women by bringing game from the wild, not by offering delicate flowers that could neither be eaten nor used, withering and dying after 3 days. The English in the ranks also harbored a deep hatred for the French. No one liked a master who constantly held them in check, allowing them to make whatever demands they pleased, and the rulers of the 7 kingdoms of England were completely powerless to resist. The English servants and thugs vented their fury, and in an instant, not a single flower field remained in Bayonne Valley. Following Samji, the salt farmers spread their sea salt onto the fields. Then, they doused them with fuel oil and set them on fire. The land, eroded by the melting salt, would be uncultivable for decades. The Vikings had survived for centuries in the impoverished Scandinavia thanks to the sheer determination in their blood. Any foreigner who dares to infringe upon my interests, I will not only kill and burn your houses, but I will also pollute your land, depriving you of your food supply forever. A raging fire rose from the White Cloud Valley. Amidst the smoke, the Vikings slowly approached the luxurious castle at the end of the canyon. The final showdown was imminent. Meanwhile, inside the castle, André gazed out the window, knowing his last shred of hope had vanished. These 2 acres of rose fields in the White Cloud Valley were the very foundation of his life. After all, he had signed a 30-year contract with a Plantagenet family. For those 30 years, he would deliver rose bouquets to the Plantagenet family on time, every season. Yet, now, 2 acres of roses were being scorched by the flames. Even the air was filled with the scent of roses, sea salt, and smoke. He would certainly not be able to deliver any bouquets to the Plantagenet family tomorrow. And not only tomorrow, but looking at the land scorched by the sea salt, he feared that the White Cloud Night would vanish from human civilization forever. He couldn't even imagine the dire consequences of breaching the contract. Even more despairing was the fact that all this was not his fault, but the result of the mysterious suzerain beside him. No one in this world achieves success easily. André, having made it this far as a businessman, wasn't some bloated fool. True, the English Isles were filled with self-important French nobles who lorded it over them, doing whatever they pleased. Such individuals might achieve success, but they could never rise to become monopoly capitalists. André understood the duties of a businessman. He knew clearly that everything he had achieved today was a gift from the Plantagenet family. To maintain his close ties with the French royal family, his only bargaining chip was to provide them with the palace's essentials, White Cloud Knights, On time and on time. The Duchy of France was brimming with talent, but only André could handle this arduous task. To do so, he had to do everything in his power to maintain the stability of the Cloud Province. He would never resort to such foolish acts as abducting women or imposing privation of the first night. If André desired women, he could easily find a few fair-skinned, well-behaved, high-class socialites in Paris. It would be as easy as eating and drinking. He had no need to covet a few ordinary-looking peasant women. Moreover, as shrewd as he was, how could he not know that the neighboring province was now under the control of those brutal Vikings? Civilized people feared nothing more than encountering such unreasonable barbarians. Seeing the unruly Vikings patrolling the border, André was eager to have his retainers take a detour. The farther they went, the better. He knew that the rules common to civilized people didn't apply to illiterate savages. A fox borrowing the power of a tiger requires the beast in front of it to recognize the tiger behind it. If it were confronted by a group of idiots who had no idea what a tiger was, the fox would still be beaten to death. Provoking the Vikings wasn't André's intention at all. It was the order of the suzerain. Ever since he'd seized his estate last year, the mysterious suzerain hadn't left. Mr. Diamond-Flowered Durand had veiledly told him to obey the Lord's every request. Never disagree with him. André had never seen anyone so frightened the president of the French Merchants Association. But the president wouldn't threaten him for no reason. His intelligence, tactics, and sophistication were all far superior to his. If he said so, he must have a reason. After the suzerain arrived in Yun province, André, through various conversations with this prominent figure, finally understood a crucial term, Illuminati. Initially, he was naturally skeptical of the suzerain's claims. However, after the suzerain displayed various miraculous signs in his presence, his businessman's keen sense immediately led him to conclude that these individuals were the true masterminds of the entire human world. The suzerain successfully recruited him into the Illuminati's fringe group, for their next plan. Chapter 362 Deep Diver. This bastard is hiding in this castle. Brothers, attack the city for me. They say these French bastards are rich. It would be fine if we didn't take the initiative to rob them, but this bastard actually dared to provoke me. Tear down their fortress, take their women and children. The Viking army stood in front of the castle. Facing the sparse rain of arrows from the city wall, Clint pulled out the short axe behind him and hurled it. The short axe ignited a ball of flame in flight, then turned into a blazing wheel of fire. The spinning and sharp wheel of fire accurately cut through the suspension bridge's cables. With a loud bang, the previously suspended moat lost its support and fell to the ground. Sickered, the wolf-eyed figure transformed into a mountain giant, shouldered a thick log. Boom, boom, boom. The carved gates, more decorative than practical, seemed as fragile as eggshells against the 1-meter-thick tree stump. 3 hammer blows shattered the 2 carved steel doors. The Vikings, braving a hail of arrows from above, advanced directly into the castle. All of this was witnessed by the suzerain standing on the wall. Seeing Alfred entering the castle at the rear, he glanced at the 3 black-clad figures standing behind him and clapped his hands softly. Your Highness, the Deep One, your divination is truly accurate. Alfred has truly entered the castle just as predicted. Facing the suzerain were 3 strange figures wrapped in thick black felt. The heavy felt wrapped them tightly like mummies, yet even so, it still dripped with moisture. The air was filled with a faint smell of sea salt and fresh fish. The mysterious figure, addressed by the sect leader as the Deep One, stepped forward and saluted respectfully. We, the cult of Dagon, only work for a fee. It's remarkable that your Highness, after all these years, still remembers us, a marginalized people from the depths of the ocean. As long as your Excellency keeps your promise, the 100,000 drowned people who inhabit the ocean will forever be at your command. The Deep One extended a pale, limp tentacle from beneath a damp felt. The sect leader frowned, but after a moment's hesitation, he placed a sign ring within the Deep One's tentacle. When collaborating with these outer gods, the Western continent's rule has always been work first, pay later. The thought of resistance only lingered in the sect leader's mind for a second before being ruthlessly extinguished. After 2 battles with Loki, the Cyclops legions had been decimated, the burrowing worms had been slain, the entire demonic army had been destroyed, and even the black shark, clad in the skin of a Viking king, had been annihilated by Loki. At a banquet, in front of 2,000 guests from the Western continent, Loki pulled a black shark from Ivar's body, officially exposing the existence of the Illuminati. From then on, every ruler in the Western continent felt a sense of unease. Returning from the banquet, The monarchs began a campaign to eliminate the lizardmen. These creatures were easy to detect. Simply cut through the skin with a sharp blade to see if there was another layer of lizard scales beneath. Lizardmen possessed exceptional stealth abilities and a long lifespan, but their combat capabilities were generally very weak. Within a single month, the suzerain spies planted within the various rulers were eliminated. The Western continent's undercover plan, which had operated smoothly for thousands of years, was practically paralyzed. Aside from a few prominent figures painstakingly planted in Constantinople, the suzerain had lost virtually all his leverage in other Western continent countries. However, those spies in Constantinople were the very foundation of his existence, and he could not contact them unless absolutely necessary. All his troubles were caused by the young lord named Loki. The most urgent task is to eliminate him. Just as there are mercenaries among humans, there are also thugs among the gods who work for others in exchange for money. The cult of Dagon, permanently hidden in the ocean, is one such cult. This sect worships a mysterious sea creature called Dagon. Unlike most gods who have left Earth, the true terror of the cult of Dagon lies in the fact that their chief deity, Dagon, still dwells in the ocean. Sailors out on voyages often spot a massive creature, over 300 meters, on stormy nights, on the windswept sea. It has a head similar to a dragon, but with hind fins like those of a fish. It is a creature somewhere between a fish and a dragon. It has fish scales and fins, but a dragon's head and 6 pairs of legs. It resembles a dragon, yet its body is as slender as a sea serpent, and it lacks the wings of a dragon. It cannot fly, nor survive long on land. Since ancient times, this beast has been frequently sighted by sailors around the world. It bears different names and different records from different countries. In Homer's epic poem The Odyssey, ancient Greek sailors called this strange creature Scylla. In the texts of the holy bishops, it was called Draconipides, and many monks even believed it to be a close relative of the ancient serpent that tempted even the Garden of Eden. Millennia ago, poor shipbuilding technology made even the most powerful humans tremble in fear at sea. Therefore, Dagon has successfully survived successive civilizations, far outliving the many outer gods roaming the Kyushu continent. However, despite the interplay of human civilizations, the cult of Dagon has never gained traction. The reason is the inherent evil nature of this ancient god, known as the Great Old One. Unlike most gods who grant mortals power while allowing them to retain their own appearance, Dagon is an extremely selfish evil deity. It demands that all believers within the temple be transformed into its preferred form, with pale skin and degenerate limbs. The long-standing lack of human participation has ensured that despite its long existence, the cult of Dagon has remained largely uninitiated. Furthermore, the recent rise in maritime technology has made human ships increasingly robust. Even if Dagon were to personally lead an expedition, he might not be able to safely drag mortals into the sea. Many times, he has been decimated by swordsmen from the Eastern Tang dynasty. All nations surrounding the Mediterranean Sea on the western continent have deemed the cult of Dagon a cult of evil. Upon discovery, they are immediately purged. With their numbers dwindling, the cult urgently needs cooperation with the strongest members of human society to survive. Mewtwo, the Lord of Earthsea, now nearly penniless, becomes their ideal ally. Chapter 363 Mewtwo's Plan. As a veteran lizard, Mewtwo rose to become one of the 12 lords and successfully conquered the Mediterranean, a vital region for human civilization. He was exceptional among his tribe in terms of intelligence, adaptability, and even resilience under pressure. Even in dire circumstances, having lost all his subordinates, he refused to give up, instead devoting the entire winter to grappling with how to turn the tide. After careful consideration, he concluded that the key to a reversal lay in eliminating the disruptor known as Loki. Having witnessed the powerful fighting abilities of Loki and the Vikings, the Lord knew that even if he summoned the Deep One of the 3 abyssal priests of the cult of Dagon, in a head-on confrontation, he would have no chance of threatening Loki's life. Rather than a brutal confrontation, leveraging the enemy's allies to divide them from within was a far better option. The lizardmen, who have hidden within human civilization for tens of thousands of years, were well versed in this strategy. Amidst the rise and fall of civilizations, they secretly cultivated peripheral members under the guise of the Illuminati, orchestrating one major war after another. They then successfully cultivated allies in the interstices between these conflicts, accumulating wealth and waiting for opportunities for expansion. It was never the Illuminati that destroyed humanity, but humanity itself. At this time, Loki remained surrounded by the 7 kingdoms of England. The primary reason the Seven Kingdoms maintained a semblance of peace with him was the Protons he held in his thrall. Of all these Protons, the most important was Prince Alfred of Wessex. Having hidden himself in the western continent for tens of thousands of years, the overlord had intimate knowledge of all the peoples of this land. He knew the Vikings to be a savage people, easily inflamed and uncaring of their own kin once they took up their axes. Therefore, when a Zoroastrian spy delivered intelligence that Alfred was imminently approaching the border of Normandy, the overlord immediately sought out André, who had leased a cloud province. The entire drama of seizing the woman and then accidentally letting her escape was calculated by the clan leader himself. With divination performed by the deep diver, the divination indicated at least a 30% chance that Alfred would encounter Clint's rescue team and appear in Yun province with the Vikings. Sure enough, the clan leader's bet was correct. By this time, Alfred had successfully entered the castle. His plan was 90% complete. The castle where André lived was not built by him personally, but was modeled after a castle built by a prince of a branch of the House of Valois. Originally, this castle in the White Cloud Valley was merely a temporary residence for him to enjoy the flowers in the summer. However, for the English, even a vacation castle would occupy approximately 3,000 square meters. In the eyes of the French, the English are the epitome of uncouth and crude. Whether it's food, clothing, or castles, their creations have a lingering rusticity, completely lacking the French refinement and luxury. André had considered demolishing the castle and rebuilding it, but the sheer scale and length of the project deterred him from this decision. The castle's outer walls now housed the gardeners from the French duchy, along with the cooks, servants, and stable hands. The middle level housed André's hired French mercenaries. The innermost level housed André himself, his mistress, his male companion, and his personal guards. After emerging from the sunken city last summer, Clint had accompanied Loki in a series of sieges and captures, becoming thoroughly familiar with the common English castle structures. According to standard siege procedures, as he led his army through a direct assault, the crossbowmen stationed on the towers should have immediately descended, leveraging the complex terrain to engage the enemy in street-to-street combat, thus protecting the lord's retreat. However, once they breached the gates and entered the castle, the fortress was struck by a strange silence. The guards, who had been shouting and firing crossbows from the castle's rooftops just minutes before, seemed to have melted into thin air. The Vikings emerged into a city so quiet it was almost eerie. Not a cry of women or children shivering in the cold. No crowds scurried through the streets. Not even a single poultry, the chickens, ducks, and geese that every household kept. Clint gripped his axe, keenly sensing a hint of conspiracy. However, the Wancha, Faith, and Sanji, who had joined him in the assault, lacked Clint's extensive combat experience. They glared at each other, their eyes gleaming with greed. No one would begrudge excessive wealth, especially after they had tasted the fruits of middle-class life. Owning 10 acres of fertile land would envision expanding it to 30. Owning a manor would instantly envision converting it into a castle. Human greed knows no bounds. Entering the city of a French lord, faced with this unexpected wealth, they forgot all thoughts of conspiracy. Everyone roared, charging into the city, ransacking the houses and slaughtering the civilians. Not only the Vikings, but even the English in Normandy fully unleashed their brutality. Only Clint and Alfred stood at the rear. Clint's hesitation stemmed from his extensive combat experience. In 62 years of war, he had witnessed the incredible and elaborate methods used by humans of all races to kill one another. His intuition told him that what was happening before him suggested an ambush. But the Vikings were inherently clueless about the concept of ambush. To them, the distinction between a face-to-face battle and a desperate struggle encircled was indistinguishable. All battles involved swinging the axe until the last enemy was defeated. Being ambushed or ambushed meant nothing more than killing a few hundred more enemies. Compared to Clint, Alfred harbored more doubts. First, he detected a faint fishy odor lingering in the air inside the castle. The castle sat at the end of the White Cloud Valley, a valley that produced only one product, White Cloud Night, and the coastline lay several kilometers away. The lack of floral fragrance in the air would have been one thing, but a fishy odor like that was simply out of place in the castle of a refined French noble. It was completely out of character for their lifestyle. Furthermore, as he entered the streets of the outer city, he discovered that the houses were not entirely empty. Within them were resident flower farmers and their wives, children, and offspring. Yet, faced with the Viking axes, they remained dazed, neither flinching nor dodging. The axes pierced their flesh, and they fell silently, like trees. The blood that flowed after death was also extremely scarce. A closer look revealed that their pale flesh seemed to have been bled. As these sluggish, living beings were felled one after another by the white axes, the oppressive, rotting fishy odor within the castle intensified. It seemed the odor stemmed from the thin blood of the deceased residents. Although Alfred had little combat experience, he had, after all, received the education of a sovereign in Constantinople. The scholar's ample knowledge of secrets and thousands of years of research into the gods told him that the city before him was far from harmless as he had imagined. Something far more horrific must have occurred within. He drew his silver sword and walked towards the city wall behind him. Chapter 364 Stepping into Trap. If other young men were dragged from their warm homes to serve the Vikings, they would undoubtedly have resisted. But Alfred had a different view. Since childhood, King Ecgbert of Wessex had groomed him as the next king. To become king, he must possess a wealth of knowledge and a depth of understanding greater than that of ordinary nobles. As ruler, his greatest weapon was not the sword in his hand, but the spark of his mind. Ever since becoming Loki's adopted son, Alfred had been pondering a single question. The 7 kingdoms of England, with populations and power exceeding the Vikings by more than 10 times, were defeated on the battlefield. They must have done something right. And England must have gotten that same thing terribly wrong. Failure is not to be feared. What is feared is the inability to learn from each defeat and prevent a worse one the next. In Constantinople, mentors tirelessly instilled this principle in all young kings. Alfred's entry into Loki's fold was a quest for answers to this question for all of England. Initially, he believed the gods of Valhalla had bestowed the Vikings with immense power. However, upon personally entering Asgard and hunting and fighting alongside the young Vikings, he discovered that, in terms of sheer strength, they were not much superior to the well-equipped heavy infantry trained in traditional knightly techniques. It was only after facing death again and again, witnessing the passing of so many of his companions, that Alfred finally grasped the truth. The Vikings were warriors who lived for death. They could die with a smile, and without hesitation, they forsaken all worldly concerns. While hunting in Asgard, he was deeply impressed by the Slavic king, Bakenbush. For unknown reasons, Loki specifically asked him to join Bakenbush's band and follow him. Their first encounter with the Vikings began when, while aimlessly wandering, they encountered a horde of wolves in Muspelheim, the land of fire. Seeing the swarm of fire wolves charging across the mountains, Alfred's first instinct was to turn and flee. Unexpectedly, however, Bakenbush beside him burst into laughter. "By Odin, Princess Huckhallen, thank you for granting me this perfect day." He opened his arms as the torrent of fire surged across the mountains. "Little yellow-haired kid, did you see that? There's nothing more satisfying than seeing these self-righteous bastards dreaming of a successful ambush only to be ruthlessly crushed by us. That's good. No need to lure any more monsters. Let's enjoy this beautiful day." Facing the swarm of firewolves, Bakenbush advanced instead. Surrounded, Alfred could only follow, brandishing his silver sword. The two immediately engaged in a bloody battle. The firewolves of the Firelands were no match for their earthly counterparts. In this scorching hellscape, where lava flowed across the land and the air was filled with scorching sulfur, all creatures had evolved terrifying abilities to survive. Hundreds of demonic wolves, each about 1.5 meters tall and as strong as a calf, swarmed around them, attacking them in turns. Alfred, with his back to Bakenbush, could only desperately swing his broadsword to survive. He had no idea how long the battle lasted. He knew only that to survive, he squeezed every last ounce of strength from his bones. The two fought from dusk to dawn, and from dawn to dusk. But after Bakenbush crushed the last demonic wolf, Alfred found he couldn't even loosen his sword's hilt. His body was soaked in blood, and only then did he feel the excruciating pain that surged like a tide. The two lay motionless amid the mass of wolf carcasses. In that moment, something within him seemed to have been permanently broken, the fear of death. After this battle, Alfred found himself no longer sensitive to the words death and fear. Even on certain nights, with a gentle breeze caressing his cheeks, he would still yearn for those days, surrounded by enemies, tirelessly wielding his broadsword, unleashing all his inner potential. In that moment, he suddenly understood why the English had lost the war. They had so much to lose: wives, young children, houses, fields, and silver hidden in the ground. But the Vikings, on the other hand, possessed nothing. A Viking's wife was a temporary possession, taken from someone today, and the same thing happened to his son. He might take one from someone else today, but he might die tomorrow. They simply moved into any house where the owner had died. If they got tired of it, they could move on. Every year, people died anyway. With silver in their pockets, they ate meat and drank wine, gambled and bought potions. Without silver, they ate dirt, starving and waiting for the next raid. The days of hunger were brief, 4 raids were yearly. Even the Slavic king, when it came to his country, could abandon it at will, wandering off for 6 months without returning. Alfred doubted it. Even if his Slavic kingdom were destroyed, this man wouldn't have a single unnecessary expression on his face. Once, he had been the crown prince of Wessex, the next ruler. Now, he was merely an adopted son. In reality, he was a prisoner serving a pagan. Life and death were no longer a matter of concern to him. He took a deep breath and slowly climbed the high wall behind him. Medieval fortresses generally had a uniform structure and design. The high walls, erected behind the moat, effectively block siege weapons while also effectively utilizing the advantages of bows and crossbows. Alfred remembered clearly that when they approached the walls, the tops were densely packed with defenders armed with arrows and crossbows. However, once inside, they didn't descend the walls. He needed to see for himself what was happening on the walls. Strolling to the top, he saw the defenders frozen in their positions, as motionless as the women and children in the houses, their faces frozen in time. Stepping forward to examine them more closely, Alfred discovered that water seemed to be seeping from beneath their bodies. A stream of water, tinged with the salty scent of the sea breeze, flowed beneath their feet, cascading down the high walls into the moat. Outside the castle, a terrifying spectacle unfolded. The blazing fires had been extinguished at some point. A flood of seawater surged from the moat, pouring into the White Cloud Valley like a flood. The path they had taken was now a vast expanse of water. What kind of unholy magic was this? Silently drawing the soul breaker from his belt, Alfred gripped the silver broadsword firmly in his hand. While it was still unclear what they had encountered, it was clear that the French merchants, who only cared about making money and commerce, were not capable of such powerful abilities. Within the castle, an even more formidable enemy must be lurking. Master Clint. Get everyone back to the city gates. We need martial law. He sprinted to the steps of the high wall, but before he could even descend, a lithe tentacle suddenly attacked from behind. Looking back, he saw the English guard, his entire body as pale as a dead fish. He thrust his broadsword into his heart, but it showed no reaction to the infusion of psychic energy. Meanwhile, the pale corpse opposite him showed no muscle reflexes of a living person. The broadsword pierced deeply into his chest, like cutting into a dead fish. The soldier didn't dodge, staring back expressionlessly with his pale eyes. It was only then that Alfred finally understood that all the soldiers in the castle were no longer alive. Their hearts were no longer beating, and the psychic energy originally stored in their hearts had long since disappeared with the leaking fluid. This was a human being completely replaced by the walking dead. At this moment, the castle was filled with these terrifying creatures. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 365 Breakout 1. The moat outside the castle was originally a narrow ditch, barely 8 meters wide. However, all the corpses atop the high walls were now using copious amounts of water. The resulting flow was so abundant that it briefly formed several waterfalls along the outer walls. Suddenly, salty seawater surged from the moat, flooding the valley and pouring back into the castle. Instantly, the castle interior was flooded. Clint's eyes rekindled his alarm. As a Viking sea dweller whose family had lived by the sea, he could clearly tell, without even touching it, by simply smelling it, that this sudden surge of water was salty seawater. Although Yun Province and Yen County were both close to the North Sea, the White Cloud Valley was still 7 or 8 kilometers from the coastline. Common sense dictated that seawater could never appear so far inland from the coast. The rapidly rushing water quickly reached his knees, its icy water melting the remaining snow on the ground, completely submerging the entire city. Such an unusual occurrence could only mean one thing: someone must be behind this. What followed immediately confirmed his suspicions. The bodies lying on the ground, bleeding profusely, suddenly rose to their feet upon contact with the seawater. Scales and gills quickly emerged from their pale skin, their eyes rapidly bulging and turning into fish-like forms. Everyone, stop fighting, Retreat to my side. Even the most stoic Vikings knew they had fallen into a horrific trap when such a bizarre event unfolded before their eyes. Seawater poured into the castle, reaching knee-high and rapidly approaching waist-high levels. Meanwhile, the pale floating corpses writhed and squirmed in the water like fish. Once they approached the Vikings, their limbs, now soft tentacles, would wrap tightly around their torsos, attempting to drag them to the bottom of the sea. No, such a commotion, and only such a gentle attack. Isn't this thing a little too weak? Vikings have lived by the sea for generations. Every member of their tribe, male or female, has sailed on long ships to plunder. Fishing and salvaging are commonplace. Could this strange floating corpse be trying to drown a group of Vikings? Just 5 months ago, Clint, 10,000 sharks, Faith, and the others had all participated in the battle against the Cyclops at Stoneyhelm. They had witnessed a might of monsters and deeply understood the power of the gods. The surging sea rose higher and higher, even the faintest ripples appeared. Just as the water was about to reach their necks, the first wave of attack arrived. A shadow suddenly appeared beneath the churning waves. A moment later, a massive sea serpent, nearly 10 meters long, soared from the water, swallowed a Viking in one gulp, and immediately sank back into the water. The deceased was the carpenter Sanji. Accompanied by a series of delicate paddling sounds, more mysterious sea creatures could be seen rapidly approaching them. It's a trap. They must be targeting Alfred. Among the Vikings, the Tribune Wolf-Eye Sigurd possessed the sharpest political acumen. Undoubtedly, the Vikings raiding the Cloud Province had fallen into a carefully woven trap. The Vikings leading the raid, Clint Fuayuki, Faith Seaclaw, Wolf-Eye Sigurd, and 10,000 Sharks Ivanovich, were all of humble origins. Their farms would be considered a considerable fortune in the eyes of the English, but to the wealthy French, they were nothing. With such a grand ambush, their targets could only be two. 1. Sanji Marish. 2. Alfred. An ambush on Sanji was a possibility. Last autumn, when Gal Marish appeared at Duke Loki's wedding, his display was even more lavish than that of an ordinary English noble. Rumors suggest he now possesses a unique route to the New World, transforming him into a cash cow that many are eager to seize. However, his son, Sanji, has already perished. A dead man is no bargaining chip. If their target isn't Sanji, then only one of the remaining men is worth ambushing, Loki's adopted son, Alfred. Last autumn, at the wedding, Loki and Bakambush unearthed the lizardman hidden within a Ver's body. If these ancient monsters, capable of burrowing into the human body, are truly as terrifying as the legends say, their war with the Vikings will clearly not cease anytime soon. Master Clint, we need to retreat, escort Alfred from the castle first, then we'll return and take out those creatures hiding underwater. Revenge may be ours, but at least we can help Duke Loki avoid unnecessary trouble. Even when surrounded, Wolf-Eye Sigurd never considered escaping. In his eyes, every encounter with a strange monster was a precious gift. Moreover, his position, bestowed upon him by Duke Loki, was tribune. When the Vikings within his territory ran into trouble, he was obliged to assist them in clearing the way. Okay, you're the tribune, I'll obey you. But, this young man seems to have been influenced by Bakambush for some reason. I wonder if he'll flee when faced with a powerful enemy. If he refuses, let me chase him away. Having lived in poverty in Scandinavia for so long, Clint had never encountered the so-called nobility. In Hanshu village, the sons of the lords and the sons of the commoners hunted together with bows and crossbows, rolling in the mud. While out raiding, they too would die in battle, starve, or freeze to death. No different from the commoners. Entering civilized society, he had to acknowledge the differences in fate. People of different backgrounds were naturally divided by distinct class barriers. Hundreds of peasant sons died, and no one cared. But if a lord's son died, war would ensue. If the English prince died under his command, Duke Loki could be expected to find himself in great trouble. The English castle was a semi-underground, sunken structure. Due to its low terrain, the seawater surged in, nearly reaching the necks of the people. Vast bubbles rose from the water, and the thick castle walls began to tremble uncontrollably. It was as if an even larger behemoth was violently pounding the wooden floorboards at the base of the castle. The real danger had yet to arrive. Chapter 366 Breakout, 2. Atop the high walls, as Alfred felled the last corpse and kicked it into the moat, a subtle tremor echoed from the walls beneath his feet. Turning, he saw that the vast castle, covering thousands of square meters, had collapsed by a third. From the shattered ruins, a massive octopus, nearly 30 meters long, emerged from the roiling sea. It possessed 10 lithe tentacles, and in the center of its head, besides a pair of large eyes, a massive, ring-shaped mouth filled with tiny, razor-sharp teeth. "So, you're the leader of this pack of strange fish." Faced with the sudden appearance of the terrifying monster, Alfred showed no sign of panic. All his fears had been extinguished during his journey exploring the 7 divine realms with Bakenbush. Crouching slightly, he narrowed his eyes, observing closely. This, too, had been taught by Bakenbush. Having spent his entire life hunting in the cold taiga at Murmansk, the Slavic king's hunting skills were unmatched. Upon discovering a target, his first reaction was to observe its habits and quickly determine its place in the food chain. By studying its food and predators, he could determine its weaknesses. Upon its appearance, the giant octopus didn't attack anyone around it like a hungry beast. It extended its soft tentacles, continuously snatching up Vikings entangled in the water, corpses, and strange fish. However, after snatching them up, it didn't attack them. Its pale tentacles held them tightly, and he held each target close to his eyes, examining them closely. "Interesting, are you looking for someone? Are you looking for me?" Calmly walking along the city wall, Alfred drew his soul breaker once again. The winding walls stretched all the way to the inner city. Reaching a platform not far from the giant octopus, he raised his broadsword and stood at the edge of the wall. "Any enemy, no matter how bizarre or terrifying, will most likely die if I plunge the blade into their skull," Alfred remembered Bakenbush's teachings. Facing the giant octopus, he felt no fear. The only slight excitement he felt was the approach of the battle. Facing the glaring midday sun, he channeled his psychic powers. He was now about 30 meters from the giant octopus. The castle wall was a full 20 meters high. If he leaped now, using the force of the gust of wind, he should be able to just reach the top of the octopus's head. He used Soul Breaker to slice through the soft, belly-like skull, then entered the octopus's skull and unleashed a whirlwind of wind, instantly annihilating any monster. After a brief moment of deliberation, he formulated a complete attack plan. He knelt slightly, a gentle breeze swirling into him. But just as he was about to leap, a sturdy arm pulled him away from the wall. Turning back, he met the sharp, razor-sharp eyes of old Clint. "Your Highness, I have a new mission for you. Cloud Province is right on the border of my Normandy region, and you've seen what's happening now. All the French bastards who lived here have vanished, replaced by a monster from the depths of the ocean. I don't know why it appeared here, but I do know that if the sea continues to spread aimlessly, our land will sooner or later be affected. I need a smart kid to report what's happening in this province to Duke Loki, so I order you to evacuate immediately. But, no buts. The sea will soon submerge the entire province. We will try to find the cause. But in this case, there must be someone alive to report the details to His Excellency the Duke." At this point, Father Clint had lost all patience. He reached out and pulled Alfred to the other side of the high wall, facing the moat below the castle. "Remember, no matter what happens, don't look back. Swing your sword with all your might and carve your way through. On the green wilderness of Helm, I once fought against your biological father's army, and he taught you well. This job can only be done by you." The old Viking, despite his rough demeanor, knew how to effectively persuade a subordinate at a crucial moment. Alfred was deeply influenced by Bakenbush. If the word escape were mentioned to him, the stubborn young man would refuse to leave. Therefore, he had to resort to a gentler approach. "Master Clint, you won't leave." Clint gazed at the rapidly rising water within the castle, his eyes ablaze with fire. "I'm here to seek justice for my adopted daughter, though I don't yet know what happened in this damned place. As long as the damned Frenchman hasn't escaped, I must rip his head off and send it to my adopted daughter." The stubborn old man said no more nonsense. He thrust Alfred down the tower. The sword-drawn youth felt only a whirlwind in his ears, powerless to change anything. He maneuvered in midair, plummeting into the moat. Only then did he see the depths of the castle. The foundation, once composed of stacked stone blocks, was now riddled with holes. Enormous sea serpents and sharks roamed the waters, rapidly closing in upon him upon detecting him. Alfred paddled hard, attempting to escape the moat, but suddenly, several pale arms emerged from the water's depths, grasping his legs. Looking down, he saw the very corpses he had chopped in two and thrown from the wall. The bodies, previously motionless on the wall, were now growing the skin of fish. Even with their legs missing, they could still rise from the moat by paddling. Seeing several massive sharks about to charge him, Alfred unsheathed his soul breaker, shredding any floating corpses that tried to reach him, and struggled to break free. The shark's jaws were within reach. His psychic energy activated, unleashing the might of Stormwalker once again. A fierce wind gathered around him, supporting his back securely, allowing him to escape the shark's jaws. Landing on land outside the moat, he was surprised to find that even here, the water was already knee-high. He had to escape the valley immediately before the massive sea monster could reach land. Chapter 367 Breakout 3. The saga book granted the Vikings 3 new berserker variants, allowing them to wield the powers of fire, frost, or hurricane. As an adopted son, Alfred was free to choose the potion he desired. After a brief deliberation, he chose the hurricane berserker, drawn to its agility, the ability to ride the wind. Of all the Vikings who had entered White Cloud Valley, only Alfred possessed this divine power, and at this moment, this ability to ride the wind would save his life. The knee-deep water was a difficult shallow ford. Too shallow for swimming and rowing, yet too deep for walking. For anyone else, wading through the water would offer no speed gains. Except for Alfred. Using his psychic powers, the wind lifted him up, and he strode towards the pass of White Cloud Valley. However, the master, ever so meticulous, had already anticipated the possibility of Alfred escaping the castle. At the valley's mouth stood 6 pale figures. They were none other than the 6 reincarnated members of the Vero cult, freshly slain by the Viking axes. Like the corpses resurrected beneath the sea, their bodies covered in fish scales, their eyes gleaming white. The reason the cult of Dagon was labeled a cult by every nation on the Western continent was precisely because its methods of acquiring power and its tactics were utterly evil. Wars between nations were usually waged over the struggle for arable land and population. Only with more arable land and more people could larger armies be developed. Even if wars left fields littered with corpses and rivers of blood, even after all the people perished, the land remained intact for the victors. When peace arrived, farmers could still sow and harvest crops to replenish the population lost in the war. Regardless of nationality, the human species could still thrive. The incense of civilization would not be extinguished. However, the war waged by the cult of Dagon is aimed at polluting the land and slaughtering the people. Within this evil cult, the priests who directly serve the evil god Dagon are known as abyssal priests. These abyssal priests possess a terrifying sorcery. They can summon seawater polluted by the evil god Dagon from coastal lands. This seawater is rich in spiritual energy and extremely salty. Once it reaches arable land, it seeps deep into the soil, transforming fertile fields into barren, saline alkali soil that will take centuries to recover. When Dagon descended upon Earth, human civilization was still in its infancy. Upon sensing disaster, this evil outer god would instantly flee at high speed in the icy waters, evading repeated pursuit by civilizations. As a great old one, it exhales a breath of spiritual energy. The seawater polluted by the evil god Dagon also possesses abundant spiritual energy. Any human corpse that comes into contact with the seawater transforms into a monstrous, pale figure covered in fish scales. Most of the chosen of the cult of Dagon begin their lives as these bizarre undead creatures. The abyss priests call them drowned men, meaning those who drowned in the sea. To join the cult of Dagon as a chosen, the first step is to transform into this half-dead, undead creature. Frankly, as an ancient faith, the chosen of the cult of Dagon are quite capable. However, due to their inherently evil nature of polluting the land and killing lives, no nation will cooperate with the abyss priests. The rulers and nobles know that losing a war will only mean the death of their own heads. However, once under the control of the abyss priests, death becomes an absolute luxury for them. The 6 reincarnated beings of the Vero cult who appeared before Alfred were drowned men, transformed back into undead creatures after being immersed in the seawater. After returning from the dead, their strength was greatly enhanced. The reason was simple: when they were human, every organ in their body was vulnerable. A broadsword piercing their heart would kill them, as would it piercing their liver and even their skull. But now, no matter how severe their injuries, even if their heads were completely shattered, the power of the drowned, bestowed by the evil god Dagon, could sustain their bodies and continue fighting. This pale corpse contained no so-called organs, no weaknesses, not even blood. Only limbs, as dry as decaying trees, remained. The first attack Alfred faced came from the Heavenly Way reincarnation, which leaped from beneath the water like a flying fish. It appeared without warning, swooping down on him like a cannonball, and then slammed him to the ground. As the salty, cold seawater poured in, Alfred felt himself being tightly engulfed by several soft yet resilient tentacles, attempting to drag him underwater. He struggled desperately. But at that moment, a second wave of attack arrived. It was the animal samsara that had once transformed into a werewolf. Under the water, it approached Alfred like a fish. Finding a gap between its tentacles, it bared its teeth and bit down. Inch-long fangs pierced the skin, easily tearing off a large chunk of flesh. The sea was quickly dyed red with blood. Alfred knew what he had to do. He took a deep breath and channeled his psychic energy, creating a brief hurricane that dispersed the water around him. Seizing the brief opening, he backhanded his sword and fiercely stabbed the heavenly samsara behind him. The soul breaker easily severed his limbs, chopping off the animal samsara's head. The blood flowing from his arm attracted a swarm of terrifying creatures that roamed the sea. Alfred again called for a strong wind, attempting to evacuate immediately, but only 4 of the 6 paths samsara survived. The next attacker was the Ashura samsara wielding the demon-subduing pestle. From a purely physical perspective, this monstrous 6-armed humanoid was quite intimidating. However, in his recent battle with Mr. Clint, his weapon had been chopped off, and 3 of his 6 arms had been lost. Even so, Alfred had a difficult time breaking through his defenses. Behind him, a long stream of bubbles emerged from the sea. The massive figure of the hungry ghost reincarnator, a massive iceberg that had been lurking beneath the surface, was now slowly emerging. Chapter 368 Breakout 4. The last thing an undead creature needs is a head. Coincidentally, Alfred had executed the idiotic giant by inserting the soul breaker into his skull. Now, the revived drowned giant had all 4 limbs intact. This was the most formidable foe time was of the essence for Alfred. The water within the valley was nearly up to his waist. As the blood spread, a horde of terrifying sea beasts, scented with the blood, raced towards him. He had to break through the undead blockade and escape the valley. However, with the sovereign's ingenuity, capturing a mere 15-year-old was a piece of cake. The entire ambush, from using the night power to injure Elena and accidentally letting her escape, to seducing Clint into vengeful attack, to the chance encounter with Alfred, to the 6 reincarnators defending the valley's pass, was meticulously planned by him and the Deep One. The Sovereign coordinated all the Illuminati's covert operations in the Western continent. Over his 200 million years, he witnessed dozens of civilizations shift and change. The Illuminati, long hidden within the cracks of civilization, manipulated their allies to attack their enemies. Each of the 12 sovereigns was a brilliant individual, profoundly understanding the concept of conspiracy. All of this was orchestrated primarily by the vast knowledge within their heads. While the vast majority of the world had never seen the chosen ones of the Vedic religion 2,000 years prior, this greasy group was no stranger to Mewtwo, the Lord of Earthsea, who possessed an infinite lifespan and had witnessed every outer god. When the Lord of the Creatures, Cassiopeia, descended upon the land of Kyushu, the deity at the height of human civilization was none other than Amun the Hidden, designated a guardian god of Egypt by Nefertiti. Amun bestowed knowledge and divine power upon mortals, and they constructed countless colossal structures for the pharaohs, hoping to grant them the key to enter the underworld and refine their divine souls. In this era, Cassiopeia was merely an ordinary figure among the countless outer gods. He, like the other outer gods, stood on the golden staircase of Pharaoh Nefertiti, accepting her orders while greedily absorbing and learning from the achievements of Amun the Hidden. Therefore, when he left ancient Egypt 1,000 years later and traveled to India to establish the Vedic religion, it was essentially a pyramid scheme combined with a cheapened version of the Temple of Anubis. Even its teachings were largely copied. Mortals must endure hardships in the mortal world before ascending to the Western Pure Land. All suffering in this world has its cause. Entering the 6 realms of reincarnation is a search for a way to eliminate suffering. Only through repeated cycles of life and death can one truly feel the power of the Lord of Life. Therefore, the true strength of the 6 realms of reincarnation does not lie in their lifetime. To truly unleash their power, they must journey through the underworld and be reborn in the space of 2 breaths, while concentrating on observing his opponent. The Azure Path reincarnationist, with all 6 arms severed, had regained his feet. Behind him, the headless animal reincarnator also stood upright. Its sharp-nailed hands grasped the severed head from the broadsword. 2 pale eyes, still glaring furiously, glared at Alfred. He was still surrounded by 6 reincarnators. Damn. This is getting tough. The icy water, already up to his waist, continued to spread. From the subtle vibrations of the water droplets, He could sense the massive aquatic creatures approaching. Being surrounded by these 6 immortal creatures was already disastrous enough, but if dozens of sharks arrived, he would surely die here today. He couldn't die, for he still had the mission of spreading the news. Knowing there was no way out, Alfred unscrupulously channeled every ounce of his spiritual energy. With his first strike, he retreated, striking at the headless werewolf and the armless floating corpse behind him. The sharp broadsword, driven by the hurricane force, easily cut both in half. Without the support of his legs, his upper body could still rely on its tentacles to move through the water, but its power was greatly reduced. With his second strike, he stabbed the Hell's reincarnation hidden beneath the surface, attempting to attack him from below. When alive, it was a black figure, covered in strange patterns and painted in pitch black. Now, though lifeless, its flesh remained unchanged. The Hell's reincarnation wielded 2 curved sickles. Lurking in the water, he suddenly leaped up without warning. Little did Alfred know, the subtle tremor beneath his feet had already detected his presence. Ignoring the 2 sickles flying towards him, he tilted his face slightly, the pitch-black blade brushing against his hair as it passed by his ear. At the same moment, the soul breaker had pierced the Hell's reincarnation's throat. With a powerful twist, the pitch-black head was instantly ripped from its neck. Turning back, he drew his sword, and both arms were easily severed by the sharp broadsword. With his third strike, he soared into the air, treading on the water, sword in hand, charging directly towards the hungry ghost reincarnator's head. The 5-meter-tall giant before him was a mountain. If he could reach the summit, he could harness the powerful wind to glide over the giant's head for a distance, leaving the valley's mouth. The floodwaters on the plains beyond the valley were far less abundant than within. Unfortunately, the 6-path reincarnator, now a drowned person, still retained some of his former fighting instincts. Just as he was about to reach the giant's head, another figure suddenly emerged from the giant's greasy, tangled hair. Hidden within the giant's tangled hair, he suddenly rose. It was the human reincarnator. Facing the sky, the human reincarnator extended his arms, now tentacles. Alfred, soaring midair, saw him facing him, his eyes widening. But there was nothing he could do. After all, he was merely a Sequence 7 storm walker of the Hurricane Berserker path, and he had yet to master the art of shifting the wind midair. Unable to gain leverage in the air, he could only watch himself fly into the arms of the reincarnator of the human path. Among the 6 reincarnators, the reincarnator of the human path possesses excellent physical fitness and a long life compared to mortals. He watched the landing point carefully and hugged Alfred in his arms, wrapping the tentacles of his arms tightly around him. However, this was only the first round of attack. Don't forget, the 2 of them are standing on top of the reincarnator of the hungry ghost path. The giant's huge palm grabbed the 2 people entangled together. And the stupid giant with a pale face opened his bloody mouth and threw the reincarnator of the human path and Alfred into his mouth at the same time. In front of him, there was a sudden darkness. Recently, I may have some business trips or overtime without warning, and sometimes updates will be in the afternoon or evening. Chapter 369 Breakout, 5. As the giant's mouth closed tightly, the last glimmer of light vanished from Alfred's vision. Within the slick mouth, he slipped down his tongue and into his throat, where he was squeezed tightly against the outer walls of his intestines. The hungry ghost Samsara's entire power was concentrated in this single mouth. Consequently, his oral and intestinal muscles were incredibly resilient. Alfred was in an extremely precarious position. Crushed by the giant's intestines, he felt as if he were being held in a powerful hand. He couldn't raise his hands, nor did he have the space to swing the nearly 4-foot-long soul breaker. And don't forget, he was still entangled in the tentacles of the human Samsara. To ensure his capture, the hungry ghost Samsara grabbed both of them and stuffed them into the giant's mouth. He now had to contend not only with the tightly wrapped intestines but also with the octopus-like restraints of the human Samsara on his body. In times of adversity, he recalled back in Bush's teachings. Danger is real. But fear is a choice, to give up resistance simply because of the possible danger of killing you, and let the cold terror take over your consciousness. Only a madman would choose that. Sissies in civilized society often talk about overcoming fear. Haha, does fear even need to be overcome? I don't understand that logic. After slicing through the giant's throat and into his abdomen, he used the remaining opening to twist the hilt of his sword. The sharp broadsword pierced the outer wall of the intestine, suspending him in mid-air like a tiny nail. A sudden pause, The peristaltic muscles of the intestines allowed the unsuspecting humanitarian reincarnator to open a tiny crack. Using this hard-earned opening, Alfred reached out with his left hand and pulled out an emerald green dagger from the outside of his leather boot. It was a graduation gift from his girlfriend, Ilithia Pompey, who had been with him in the imperial city before he graduated from Constantinople. Upon entering the Pantheon, the children of nobles, monarchs, and senators studied together. The greatest reward was the inevitable friendships they made. Alfred, having graduated from the Pantheon as the top graduate, was sure to have many friends. And each of these individuals in Constantinople was immensely wealthy. On the eve of their separation, the 14-year-old boy had already begun to develop a sense of love. To prevent her beloved from returning home and dying, Alicia, the daughter of the imperial city's grand chancellor, secretly stole a priceless and precious weapon from her home and pressed it into his hand before leaving. "Take this with you. Every time you see it, it's like seeing me, and, when I turn 16, remember to return to the city and find me. Take me away, I want to be your princess, don't let me marry the pig like Tessio." The 12-year-old girl pressed the emerald blade into her hands and immediately departed, veiled. Upon returning home and carefully examining the weapon in his hand, Alfred wondered what punishment he would face upon returning. But he knew that Alicia had risked her life for him. After days of observation, treasure appraisers from the Izumo Trading Company in Southampton, along with several old friends, concluded that the ancient sword was at least 1,300 years old. Based on its forging technique and materials, the appraisers were certain it was a dagger crafted by Master Hoboyuzi. Its appearance strongly resembled the legendary Yuchin sword mentioned in records of the Grand Historian. Biographies of Assassins. Legend has it that Helu hid the Yuchin sword in a fish's intestines in an attempt to assassinate King Liao of Wu, and it was this Yuchin sword he wielded. However, the sword Alfred brought back was not the original Yuchin, as it was at least 2 inches longer than recorded in historical records and had the characters snake bone, engraved on its side in small seal script. The appraisers speculated that it was likely one of several prototypes crafted by Master Hoboyuzi before he forged the Yuchin. Although this dagger is not recorded in historical records, it is nonetheless extremely valuable, because Hoboyuzi's forging skills were unprecedented and unparalleled. Truly unrivaled, Alfred would never have let the dagger, forever hidden in his boot, emerge unless he was in dire straits. He was nominally a prince in the English Isles, but here he couldn't even afford to offend the French, let alone the Byzantines and Tang dynasty swordsmen who were everywhere. To possess a weapon crafted by Master Hoboyuzi was a feat many martial artists dreamed of. Killing for it was nothing. Within the giant's abdomen, Alfred knew, if he wanted to break free, he had no choice but to fight tooth and nail. He grasped the dagger in his left palm and swung it with a careless movement. Everything the snake-bone dagger touched, intestines, muscles, tentacles, bones, was mercilessly severed. Unlike the soul breaker, which lacks sufficient spiritual energy to unleash its full power, this dagger required no spiritual energy at all. Its material seemed to transcend mortal metal, becoming a kind of rule, touch, sever. With his foot-long dagger, Alfred slit the hungry ghost reincarnator's intestines and entered the giant's abdominal cavity. The darkness of the abdomen was devoid of light, but with a dagger in hand, he held no fear. Whether it was organs, bones, or intestinal tissue, the emerald dagger cut a path through it with the ruthlessness of tofu. In just 3 breaths, he had ripped through the giant's abdomen. Kicking away several broken ribs, he forcefully crushed the soft organs before him. By the time the snake-bone dagger pierced through the skin, he had already escaped from the giant's back. Even with his internal organs and viscera reduced to pulp, the undead hungry ghost reincarnator remained vibrant. Ignoring the white flesh flowing down his back, he turned and attempted to pursue Alfred. However, by then, he was already riding the wind, having gained a considerable distance. After a desperate fight, he had discovered that these 6 undead were immortal. Unless they were chopped into pieces, no matter how severe their injuries, they would still be able to move vigorously. In this situation, forcing a fight was unwise, as it would only waste a great deal of his energy and time. Forcefully squeezing out the last ounce of spiritual energy within him, Alfred, using the strong wind to push against him, rolled and crawled through the sea. Behind him, the 6 paths of reincarnation were still desperately pursuing him. Besides them, a large number of sturdy fish in the water also joined the pursuit. He desperately waved his arms and paddled, climbing to the outer wall of the valley, and with a sword, he cut down several ferocious fish that had bitten his hind legs. Finally, he escaped to the outskirts of Bayern Valley. Chapter 370 Breakout 6. All the water that flooded the valley originated from the castle's base, spreading at breakneck speed, nearly filling the low-lying valley floor. After escaping White Cloud Valley, the feeling of his feet touching the earth again briefly lifted his spirits. Before he could congratulate himself on leaving behind those damned undead creatures and ferocious fish, he looked ahead. More bizarre creatures had already surrounded him. White Cloud Valley is located in the central region of Cloud Province. The valley was surrounded by endless fields of black beans. Normally, approximately 30,000 English farmhands worked here for Baron André. When Clint led the Vikings into Cloud Province, they didn't massacre the workers outside. Therefore, when the workers abandoned their tools and fled, no one intervened. Yet, Alfred now faced a sea of black people. They were supposed to be the English farmhands who originally lived and worked here, but now, none of them resembled a human being. Their backs were hunched. A massive swelling bulge formed on his back, densely covered with shimmering, wiggling tissue resembling insect eggs. A crimson, viscous fluid continuously flowed from it, bringing with it monsters like slimy, long worms emerging from their eggs. This was another path of advancement within the cult of Dagon, besides the path of the drowned. The path of the worm-haunted, the evil god Dagon, long isolated from human society, was not accepted by any nation, and therefore, their recruitment of followers was not smooth. Relying on a small number of worshippers plundered from the sea and deserted islands, the priests of the abyss developed a self-sufficient system. The drowned were floating corpses that lived in the ocean. They lived between life and death, capable of creating sea monsters and possessing exceptional underwater combat prowess. The worm-haunted were the land-based creatures of the cult of Dagon. They salvaged decaying and dead fish from the ocean to feed on, and the drowned also needed food. This was when the worm eggs bred within the worm-haunted swelling sacs came into play. These worms, imbued with the purest spiritual energy of the human body, are the perfect food for the drowned people. It's precisely this mutually devouring relationship between the drowned people and the worm-possessed that has allowed the evil god Dagon to exist independently of the three realms, relying on a limited following for so long. Upon seeing the vast, dark mass of bizarre shapes before him, Alfred immediately understood that everything that had unfolded today was a carefully orchestrated trap. The French master in Yun province had long harbored rebellious ambitions. He must have secretly been preparing for this very day. Otherwise, transforming the entire population of an entire province into monsters in a flash would be a feat not even the evil god himself could accomplish. Confined by the massive sacs on their backs, the worm-possessed creatures' movement speed was slow, and their attack power was not particularly strong. Aside from the slippery worms that unconsciously dropped from their backs, they seemed to possess only one attack, similar to acid spitting. Yet, this still put Alfred under immense pressure. Their sheer numbers were simply too numerous. 30,000 worm-possessed creatures, along with a terrifying swarm of insects like a dense carpet on the ground, advanced on Alfred. He took 2 steps back and immediately stopped. He could not retreat further. Behind him, in the icy waters, lay the immortal 6 paths of reincarnation and even more terrifying deep-sea monsters. Unable to retreat, he could only draw his soul breaker and try to fight his way forward. The deep diver always set up 3 layers of ambushes to capture Alfred. Breaking out of the castle was the most difficult, as the waters within were extremely deep. Without a keen sense of danger, the sea monsters and floating corpses within would be enough to capture him. Even if he sensed danger and fled, the 6 paths of reincarnation, now deceased and transformed into drowned people, at the ancient pass of Bayern Mountain would easily capture a 15-year-old boy. If he truly possessed exceptional talent, he could break through the 6 paths of reincarnation's blockade. Once he reached the outskirts of the valley, he would have no chance of escaping the 30,000 worm-possessed creatures alone. Even if all the worm-infested creatures were sequence 9, with just 1 person and 1 sword, even a Dalao Jinkson from the Eastern Tang dynasty would be exhausted to death on the spot. As professional gangsters among the ancient gods, the cult of Dagon was highly specialized in kidnapping, terrorist attacks, and panic-mongering. Capturing a 15-year-old boy was a piece of cake for them. The Deep One had calculated that Elder Clint would inevitably gather reinforcements from the 3 farms. He knew he would most likely encounter Alfred. The young man would surely pursue them. They would fall into a trap. Despite all his calculations, the Deep One had forgotten only the most basic one: Alfred was Egbert's biological son. As an extremely meticulous monarch, Egbert had undoubtedly heard of Viking parenting practices. With his most cherished son in the hands of these Vikings, Egbert would undoubtedly do everything in his power to secretly ensure his safety. Therefore, when his undercover agent brought word that Alfred had stolen horses and fled, he immediately summoned his men, providing another layer of protection from high above for these lawless youths. He could rest assured that his eldest son remained obediently within the rainy highlands, but leading the troops, the old father had to do everything he could. Alfred is, after all, someone's adopted son. We shouldn't intervene unless absolutely necessary. Neither the Vikings nor England can sustain another war. If we provoke these unreasonable enemies, the ultimate consequence could be their destruction, taking all of England with them. Therefore, you all, remain concealed and observe. Do not reveal yourself unless absolutely necessary. Hundreds of meters above, several griffin and moa riders saw the prince surrounded by tens of thousands of monsters. They knew it was time to show up. The calm clouds above suddenly shattered, and from within, a series of long, white plumes of air emerged, the swooping moas and griffin riders. Leading the charge was none other than Wessex's chief mercenary, Flyer Tuhert. The worm-carrying creatures were terrifying in appearance, but completely defenseless against the air. The landing griffin flapped its wings vigorously, scattering the approaching worms. A silver-armored flying knight, perched on the griffin's back, extended his long arms and scooped Alfred from the ground. Praise the Holy Lord, 1,000 gold medals. This is truly the easiest money old two has ever made. The griffin and the terror bird soared into the sky, instantly disappearing into the clouds above. Chapter 371 Escape. It's impossible to escape. Brother Tuhut, how did you get here? High in the sky, flying within the clouds was the safest option. Flyer Tuhut, a veteran of the mercenary trade, had managed to survive into his 40s in this high-ranking profession. He was a master of escape. Master Alfred, it's our generous King Ethelbert who's concerned for your safety. Of course, it's also possible he saw how handsome old two is and wanted to give me a windfall. Haha, this money came so easily, like 1,000 glittering gold coins flying automatically into his pocket. High in the sky, Tuhut's mouth widened, and he pulled out a wine flask from behind him, gulping down 2 gulps. Master, shall we go back? If you ask me, those Vikings are doomed to die after being ambushed by those scumbags of the cult of Dagon. How about, Lao Tu send you to the free seaport of Visigothia, silently, no one needs to know, find a ship there, and Lao Tu will send you to the New World to hide for a few years. We will tell the outside world that you and those Viking bastards were all eaten by the scum of the cult of Dagon. Anyway, they died in the belly of the fish, and even their bodies can't be found. Master, you don't know, although the brown-skinned women in the New World are a bit weird, they are tender and some of them are still very beautiful. Although that place is a bit humid and hot, in the summer, Lao Tu will buy you a snake, and you can sleep with a snake in your arms every day, and life will be bearable. After a few years, when all these Viking bastards are dead, Lao Tu will take you back to inherit the throne. I don't ask for much. When the time comes, you'll be your king, old two. Give me a castle, and a few pretty maids to massage my legs every day when I can't fly anymore. Well, isn't this better than being a grandson to those Vikings? High in the sky, the wind pounded his mouth. Alfred pricked up his ears, barely understanding what Tuhert was saying. Smuggling a hostage out of the country was a decision Tuhert couldn't make alone. All of this must have been arranged by his biological father, Egbert. Egbert's ability was unquestionable, having managed Wessex to become the leader of the 7 kingdoms. Despite losing a match last summer, he was never one to give up easily. In his eyes, the Vikings had merely won a temporary victory. All the conditions he agreed to the Vikings were just a tactic of compromise. Once he had grown up, he would still find a way to drive these northerners from England. They were a constant threat, and Egbert couldn't sleep even if they stayed on the English islands for another day. The first task was to find a way to retrieve his eldest son without provoking their wrath. Alfred had to admit that Trueheart's proposed arrangement perfectly served Wessex's interests. His father was still the same king he had always been. However, he himself was no longer the same. The Vikings had completely unleashed his inner self, allowing this young man, raised in various schools, to experience a long-lost sense of life. This was especially true after entering Asgard, completing the hunt, and consuming the potion. The constant lurking enemies and the ever-present threat of slaughter instilled in him the thrill of an adventurer. Living among the Vikings was like living out the epic adventures sung by bards. Every day brought uncertainty about what the next would bring. Alfred was only 15 years old. To him, homeland and politics were dull and boring. Wielding a sword, experiencing great adventures, being sung by bards, and being surrounded by young girls wherever he went, this was what Alfred desired at that moment. Furthermore, the evil god is the common enemy of humanity on the western continent. Clint, Sigurd, and other Vikings are still under siege by the evil god's followers. These are his adoptive father's people, the backbone of his conquest. After flying hundreds of miles and safely returning to the Normandy region, Alfred instructed Hard and his men to descend from the clouds near a farm. Upon landing, he flipped off his griffin, removed a gold medal from his neck, and tossed it into the griffin knight's hands. "Brother, time is running out, so I won't chat with you. I need you to do two crucial things for me. 1. Fly to Digport in Wessex and give this token to my cousin William. Convey my orders. Have him mobilize all movable ships of the North Sea Navy and sail immediately to the Cloud Province. Fill every ship with kerosene. Also, board all brothers who wish to advance their sequence levels. There's a big catch waiting for them today. They must arrive before dawn tomorrow. As long as they can come, I guarantee that everyone's sequence level will advance at least one level." 2. Send a brother to fly to the Sea-Watch Fortress and report everything you saw in the air to the Duke of Phoenix truthfully. After you help me do these two things, you fly back to Southampton and give the gold chain to father, and he will settle the account with you. After saying this, Alfred turned around and walked towards the farm not far away. Young master, are you sure you don't want to go back with me? I have more important things to do. You go first. For mercenaries, if you have money but don't make it, you're a bastard is the golden rule. In Tuhot's eyes, the young master in front of him will most likely inherit Wessex, and carrying out his orders will not harm the future business. What's more, returning the chain to Egbert will bring another income. No one can refuse such a good thing. He winked at the several Moa knights around him, and they stopped talking, flapped their wings, and took off at the same time. Tuhot knew his identity very well. In front of Alfred, as a mercenary who was paid to do things, he only had one chance to speak. After putting forward his suggestion, whether the prince accepted or rejected it, he had no right to bargain again. He sent a subordinate to fly to the Sea-Watch Fortress, and winked, letting the other Moa knights continue to perform guard duties in the sky. As for himself, he drove the griffin with all his strength and flew towards the digging port. Egbert knew in his heart that the target of the Dagon cult was most likely himself. But even so, escape was absolutely impossible. He did have more important matters to attend to, finding reinforcements and retaking Yun province. Granted, Wanghe Fortress housed 80% of Yan County's forces, but such a large army moved incredibly slowly. After mustering the troops, stockpiling provisions, and setting out on the march, Duke Phoenix's army would need at least 3 days to reach Yun province. Alfred, in a safe zone, could afford the wait. But Clint, besieged by the evil god's followers, and Wolf-Eyes Sigurd, wouldn't survive that long. Ever since living with Loki, the Vikings hadn't wronged him in the slightest. Duke Loki was currently away from Normandy. He had to fulfill his adoptive father's duty as a duke, rescue his comrades in distress. At the same time, he had to completely annihilate these scumbags within the boundaries of Yun province. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 372 Walker Rolf. Entering the farm, Alfred purchased a steed for 2 silver coins. After changing out of his clothes, which were soaked in blood mist and seawater, he swished his face with icy well water. The farm was owned by a group of surviving Mercian farmers. After asking them for directions to the nearest Viking manor, Alfred wasted no time. He mounted his horse and raced towards it. In a battle with the followers of the old gods, English mortals, without divinely chosen powers, were of no help. To rescue Old Man Clint, he needed to assemble a sufficiently powerful force. In Normandy, only the Vikings possessed such fighting power. The Viking farm the English farmer had pointed out to him belonged to a well-known Viking. He was a longtime bodyguard of the Duke of Frostfort, Phoenix. The Frostfirst Vikings hailed from the cold mountains of northern Scandinavia. Their proximity to the harsh polar conditions naturally gave them a larger build than that of ordinary Vikings. However, among them emerged a unique individual, naturally standing nearly 2.5 meters tall, without ingesting any potion. His name was Rolf the Walker. He was so called Walker because, not only horses, but even the wargs and yaks the frost folk were accustomed to riding were unable to carry this giant, weighing nearly 300 kilograms. Rolf fought in all the battles on foot, axe in hand. On the battlefield, he was a formidable force. After the war, he was allocated land and property, as usual. However, Rolf had never shown any interest in farming. The Coldstone family, resident of Frost Ridge for generations, was unlike most Vikings who valued pure force. Sioux raiding only accounted for a small portion of their livelihood. A much larger portion came from sailing large sailboats and whaling. When their ships carried precious whale oil and sealskins to other countries of the western continent, the Frost folk were inevitably attacked by other pirates. Almost all captains employed several powerful thugs aboard their vessels. Rolf the Walker was tasked with training the guards. Rolf's farm was called Rolf's Battle School. He had transformed the 50 acres of land given to him by Loki into a vast training ground. Homeless orphans, Englishmen seeking to learn martial arts and become mercenaries, and many young Vikings hoping to enter Asgard to hunt came here to learn their skills. The Vikings' training methods were simple and ancient. Normandy, unlike Scandinavia, was home to a vast and powerful variety of beasts. Here, there were only endless, almost crowded people. Rolf couldn't, as he had done back home, throw his new recruits into the Skybreak Mountains to be hunted by the ferocious beasts that had survived from ancient times. There were no beasts here, so he had to adapt his methods. Rolf's training method was called blood battle. Every morning, the over 500 warriors at the battle school would draw lots to divide into two teams. Then, unarmed, they were placed within the 50 acres of fertile farmland for practical combat training. Before entering, they were unarmed. Each player had to find weapons on their own, or kill others and plunder them. There was no food. A small amount of food was hidden within the field, and most of it had to be obtained through combat. The two sides would clash in the arena with unsharpened weapons until the last member of the opposing team was defeated. The victor returned to a warm bed and was rewarded with food, wine, and women. The loser would camp out in the fields, recovering from their injuries and reflecting on their defeat. After a 3-day rest period, the next round of competition would begin. The Vikings disdained methods of teaching combat skills similar to the School of the Sword in the Duchy of France or the School of Fighting in Constantinople. In Rolf's eyes, all of Odin's people were born warriors. Their brains are naturally primed with memories of battle. All that's needed is to create repeated, critical situations to unleash the fighting techniques bestowed upon them by the gods. Although the swords found on the battlefield are all unsharpened, blunt instruments, the roughly 10% fatality rate in each round speaks volumes about the realism of combat. At Rolf's Battle Academy, new recruits who survive 3 rounds of bloody combat enter the battlefield without fear. Those who manage to survive 10 rounds are ready to wield their axes with a ferocity rivaling that of veterans. Rolf never teaches his new recruits how to wield an axe or chop, and his Battle Academy doesn't teach any moves or techniques. All memories of battle must be learned by the recruits themselves, on the battlefield. To survive, the recruits must unleash the fierce determination of their hearts, just as their ancient ancestors, unarmed, stood in the wilderness, facing the swarms of outer gods and demons, tearing them apart with their own hands. When Alfred galloped into Rolf's farm, the sun was nearly setting below the sea. Seeing the Prince of Wessex on horseback, the guards at the village gates opened the gates without hesitation, admitting him. Alfred dismounted and rushed into the farm. Captain of the guards, Rolf, as the Duke's adopted son, muster all the fighting forces within the farm. The Duke of France in Yun province has rebelled. Tens of thousands of followers of the evil god are now besieging our brothers fighting alongside us. We must send troops immediately to support them and return to Yun province before dawn. At the word rebellion, Rolf, slouching in his enormous recliner, perked up. Then, at the word followers of the evil god, he leaped upright. My dear prince, has any demigod appeared? Recalling the boundless sea and endless parasites in the valley, Alfred nodded cautiously. Haha, praise Odin. Boys, hurry up and pull out my carriage, and take all the new recruits in the room who can still walk. Rolf, extremely excited, didn't even put on his shoes and ran out barefoot. You bastards are really lucky. You can even kill an old god in my academy. If you happen to be seen by Odin, you will be promoted to the chosen one. This is really a blessing from heaven. It's the luck of your life. What are you waiting for? Maybe Odin, Thor and Frey have already set their sights on us. Everyone, mount your horses. Hurry and set off. Chapter 373, Porcupine Gwyn Harold. Alfred walked alone into Rolf's battle academy and emerged, followed by a force of nearly 500 men. A massive carriage pulled by 8 horses stood out. Odin's people, witnessing the once-in-a-century appearance of an old god, felt no fear. Instead, they were filled with the excitement of discovering a rare treasure. Rolf was a chosen one of the Frost Giant path. He had been stuck at Sequence 4, Frost Conqueror, for quite some time, and the potion required to advance to Sequence 3, Frost Lord, was far too complex. He had entered Asgard twice, yet he hadn't managed to gather the necessary ingredients. If he could ascend by defeating the evil god this time, it would be a godsend. For the War Academy's principal, whose livelihood depended on combat, he couldn't refuse such a precious adventure. Simply possessing this army wasn't enough. After a brief conversation with Rolf, the group, under the stars, galloped towards the sea. Gwyn and Harold were 2 truly unique Vikings. Born in Blood Dove Town, Gwyn was a true Viking seafarer. Compared to his peers, however, he was short and lacked strength. The only gift a god Odin bestowed upon him was a brain, far more brilliant than any other. However, for a common Viking, this brain was of limited use. Whether plundering at sea or hunting in the mountains, Gwyn's every expedition was a thrilling and strained existence. Finally, at the age of 16, he was ambushed by several Slavic warriors in the Warsaw province on the eastern shores of the Baltic Sea. After capturing him, they mercilessly taunted the diminutive Viking, who stood only 1.5 meters tall. They broke his spine, rendering him permanently unable to walk upright. They then cast him to the foot of a snowy mountain, where he would be fed to hungry wolves at nightfall. However, Gwyn refused to yield to fate. Despite his crippled legs, he gritted his teeth and, with his bare hands, scraped through the frozen earth, crawling through the icy coniferous forest into the flowing hot springs. The icy river carried him downstream, back to the shoreline where the Viking longships docked. Relying on his powerful hands, an insatiable will to survive, and a good deal of luck, Gwyn had narrowly escaped death from the clutches of Hela, the goddess of death. However, a far more daunting task now lay before him. He was a cripple, possessing only legs, unable to walk. Scandinavia couldn't sustain an idler, and even if he returned with the longships, unfit for any work, he would face certain death. Just then, Harold appeared. Unlike Gwyn's diminutive stature, Harold stood a towering, muscular man, over 2 meters tall. He made his living logging on the Dragon's Breath Plateau, and during the autumn raids, he followed the Duke's fleet into the Slavic lands, where he indulged in plunder. Year-round, he was either felling trees or butchering people, possessing a formidable physique. However, this autumn, while he was rummaging through a manor house searching for loot, a Slavic farmer hiding beneath his house, determined to perish alongside the Vikings, set the entire estate ablaze. Instantly, flames erupted and thick smoke billowed. The farm's vast expanse trapped Harold. By the time he finally managed to carve a path with his axe, the flames and smoke had completely destroyed his sight. He was rendered blind. In many cases, the line between heaven and hell is as thin as a sheet of paper. The transformation from a strong and robust Viking to an incapable burden can happen in an instant. Harold, guided by his companions, returned to camp, facing his own fate of extinction in this cruel society. However, upon seeing him, Gwyn felt as if he had found a savior. Gwyn had eyes and hands, but no legs, and could not walk. Harold, while a formidable man, had lost his sight. After a brief conversation that night, the two forged a strange symbiotic relationship. From then on, whenever they went out raiding, Gwyn would ride on Harold's neck, throwing javelins and guiding his path. Meanwhile, Harold's task was to wield a great axe and, at Gwyn's command, cut down any enemies in their path. Initially, no one was optimistic about these remarkable survivors. Most of Blood Pigeon Town bet they wouldn't survive the next winter. However, their fierce determination to survive was so strong that they supported each other year after year. They even survived the English invasion last year, which cost them 60% of their comrades. Although they came from Blood Pigeon Town, the meritocratic old man Hummel never even considered these two crippled men, and their loyalty to Loki was completely trustworthy. When it came time to divide the spoils, the two chose not to take any land, but instead an abandoned seaside castle and 3 rams, intending to continue their free life as pirates on the seas. Throughout the winter, They sailed to the Visigothic free cities and the Mediterranean, plundering isolated merchant ships, ambushing other pirates, and engaging in illicit trade. In just 5 months, this pirate gang had grown to possess 10 ships of various types and nearly 500 men. The Porcupine pirate group gradually gained fame across the Mediterranean. Many in the free cities of the Visigoths had seen this bizarre duo. Rolf the Walker enjoyed a close relationship with the pirates, as at least half of their 400 men had been trained by Rolf and were highly skilled in their operations. It happened that they had recently been away from sea and were resting in the castle. Alfred and Rolf traveled under the stars to Gawain Manor. Before they had exchanged a few words, the two brothers smiled and nodded simultaneously. They had been eyeing the wealthy French lord in Cloud Province for a long time. If it weren't for Duke Loki's order to refrain from seeking trouble for the next 2 years, they would have long since chosen a dark and stormy night to infiltrate his manor and steal whatever wealth they could. Now, the opportunity to plunder the French succubus openly had arrived. The pirates understood no such useless nonsense as evil gods and conspiracies. At that moment, all they could hear was the melodious sound of gold coins scattering on the ground. Blind Harold silently walked to a corner and donned a chariot shaped like a chair across his chest. Then, he expertly lifted Gawain and laid him down on the chair behind his neck. Gawain moved his numb legs and wrapped them around his thick neck. Harold slung his javelin behind his back and strapped 2 hand axes to his waist. In their current state, the 2 men couldn't mount horses. Their mount was a 2-wheeled chariot pulled by 2 horses. This design also dated back to ancient Rome. Since their days in Scandinavia, the 2 men had long dreamed of owning such a chariot, but now, as pirates, they had finally achieved their goal. Half an hour later, 400 pirates emerged in force, bringing Alfred's reinforcements to 900. This was already a considerable army, but recalling the densely packed 30,000-strong parasite-infested population in Yun province, he knew it wasn't enough. Chapter 374 Bonarella. Night had already fallen. Alfred didn't have much time to waste. The force that had followed Clint into Cloud Province numbered 1,000 men. With the sea completely filling the White Cloud Valley, most of them couldn't hold out for long against the siege of the drowned people. To save the lives of his adoptive father and his subjects, Alfred had to lead reinforcements as quickly as possible. Therefore, his only option was to head for another manor and then lead his troops toward Cloud Province. After 3 minutes of deliberation, he chose not to target a Viking farm again. This time, he chose a castle. Salt County was half the size of Loki's former domain, River Valley. Despite its small size, 80% of the land was fertile, easily cultivated soil. Even the uncultivated wilderness was far superior to the barren frozen soil of Scandinavia. This abundant arable land allowed the province to boast 8 castles belonging to the nobility. After conquering the province, most of the English nobles were expelled, with only one retained by Loki. The reason was simple: this Bonarella was Elizabeth's uncle. One of the few relatives of the Ella family who had a good relationship with Elizabeth. When the Vikings were dividing the spoils, Elizabeth had implicitly asked you if his uncle could keep the castle, built by generations of hard work. As the savior of the entire Viking race, Loki always obeyed Elizabeth's orders. As a result, Bonarella became the only Mercian in Normandy to retain his territory. During a brief conversation over dinner, Alfred learned that Elizabeth's willingness to help this relative stemmed from her uncle's annual donation of 500-1,000 gold pounds to the Oxfordshire orphanage to cover its daily expenses. While most Mercian nobles were willing to participate in charity, their enthusiasm was often fleeting. Only this Bonner had consistently sent money on time, every year, for over a decade. Elizabeth casually mentioned it at the dinner table, but Loki, preoccupied with over 10,000 urgent matters, paid no heed. Alfred sneered and remained silent. The castle from which Bonner ruled sat on a crucial north-south thoroughfare connecting Mercia. Here, he built the province's largest bazaar, and relying on the flow of merchants and visitors, it gradually grew into the largest marketplace in the surrounding provinces. Besides the bazaar, in recent years he has also developed brothels, casinos, theaters, and even a large public bathhouse. Within a decade, this emerging city, called Sheffield, could even surpass Seawatch as the largest city in Saltshire. Based solely on transaction volume, this bazaar could bring him nearly £100,000 annually. Yet, this miser only gave a few £100 to his niece. Such a person could hardly be called generous. Alfred chose to march to Sheffield, under Bonner's command, primarily because he wanted to fight the strange creatures in the Cloud Province. Simply swinging an axe was too tiring. The worm-bearers were numerous, and the drowned people were as invincible as tree stumps, indestructible. Throughout the province, only Sheffield possessed kerosene, which could inflict widespread damage, and the black powder sold by Tang merchants. These were powerful weapons for decimating large groups of closely packed enemies. If the city's 2,000 light cavalry could be withdrawn, the militia could be recruited, and all the kerosene and black powder in the city could be urgently requisitioned, the Vikings would greatly reduce casualties in their slaughter of the worm-bearers. Alfred's intentions were sound. However, he forgot a crucial point: Bonner wasn't a Viking who had always followed Loki. He felt no sympathy for his compatriots trapped in a siege. After the army entered the city, he spent a full hour dawdling before waking from his bed and getting dressed. Out of respect for his adoptive mother, Alfred didn't immediately react. He honestly explained his purpose to his uncle. However, all he was met with was merciless ridicule. "Your Highness, do you really consider yourself a Viking? What's the fate of these beasts, whether they live or die, to us? Besides, all of England is eager to stay as far away from the hot potato of Yun province as possible, and you're actively trying to get close to those damned French. Didn't Egbert tell you how those French bastards humiliated us 12 years ago?" After these 4 sentences, Alfred's face darkened. His tolerance for Bonner was based on one single reason: his surname was Ella. He was his adoptive mother's uncle. In Wessex, no noble would dare speak to him in such a way. For 15 years, Alfred had lived under Egbert's wing, receiving no guidance from any elders. Unexpectedly, his first experience of being lectured by a relative came from an outsider from Mercia. Even more infuriating, this man was the younger brother of the honest man, Ella. Alfred felt his blood suddenly surge. 15-year-olds are naturally full of youthful vigor. The long night was drawing to a close. If he couldn't return to Cloud Province before sunrise, Old Man Clint and all his men would die. He was Loki's adopted son. When his adoptive father was away from the province, he was the acting lord of this land. Clint, Wolf-Eye Sigurd, Seaclaw of Faith, all of them were his subjects. The chivalry ingrained in his bones compelled him to do whatever it took to get them home safely. With a soft swish, he drew the soul breaker. "Bonner Ella, in the name of the Duke's adopted son, I warn you. All nobles in Normandy must respond to the Duke's call to arms. If you disobey, I will immediately confiscate your property and execute you on the spot." Bonner glanced at him with disdain. How, Your Highness, this is Normandy, not your ancestral home of Wessex. You must understand clearly that everything Duke Loki has received today was bestowed upon him by my Ella family. Without us, he's nothing. A bunch of northern roughnecks with a few tricks up their sleeves, slaughtering our compatriots and seizing our land. If the evil god can annihilate these northern scum, I will build 10 temples for this great evil god tomorrow. He extended a slender finger, adorned with a sapphire ring, and pointed it at Alfred's forehead. "Boy, remember this, although we may not share the same clan or surname, you and I are both English. Don't think that just because those Viking wolves played with you for 2 days, you can side with those pagans. It's a pity you, a traitor, aren't my own son. If I had a son like you who took a traitor as your father, I would have long ago." Bonner hadn't finished his words when he suddenly felt a cold, foreign object pierce his chest. Looking down, he saw it was Alfred's sword. The cold-blooded young man ignored him. With a clean, sharp movement, he drew his weapon. And amidst a shower of blood, Bonner Ella cried out in agony and fell to the ground, dead. Alfred shook the blood off his soul breaker and looked at a servant behind him. "What's your name?" The young servant was clearly stunned by the scene before him. His mouth trembled as he spoke his name in a trembling voice. "Okay, from now on, you are the acting ruler of Sheffield. I need you to do a few things for me." Although it was already dark, and the soldiers and most of the shops and the barracks were asleep, Alfred accomplished all of his objectives within an hour. His attendant, armed with Bonner's token, entered the barracks and summoned all the troops stationed there, totaling 3,000 infantry and cavalry. He also mobilized 30 carts of kerosene and over 20 barrels of black powder from the warehouses. The militia quickly loaded all the supplies onto wagons and followed the troops outside the city. Alfred's status as the Duke's adopted son, coupled with the attendant holding Bonner's token, aroused no suspicion. He certainly wouldn't be so foolish as to announce to the entire city that the Lord had fallen at his hands. By the time he emerged from Sheffield with 4,000 men and ample supplies, the darkness before dawn had already arrived. He had assembled all the forces necessary for a counterattack. The decisive battle with the cult of Dagon was imminent. Chapter 375 Hunting Time. At the same time, in Bayonne Valley, Clint stood with his back to the cold stone wall, his hands tightly gripping the axe of his deceased old friend. Thick darkness enveloped the castle interior. In the cool moonlight outside the window, he could see tiny bubbles rising from a pond not far from him. He was on the castle's third-floor terrace. Behind him lay the boundless, deep blue ocean. The pool of water behind him had once served as a stairway leading into the castle. The stairwell was filled with seawater, which could only mean one thing: the first and second floors of the castle had been completely engulfed. Relying on exceptional combat skills, Clint fought tenaciously for 10 hours alone within the castle. During that time, countless strange-looking sea creatures perished under his axe. At midnight, the cries of other Vikings could still be heard from within the vast castle's interior. But now, a dead silence reigned around him. Almost no sound had been heard. Though he hated to admit it, Old Man Clint knew they had most likely ascended to Valhalla to drink with the gods. He was alone in the dark castle in the forest. Old wolves were the most dangerous creatures. Though their teeth were loose and their strength was weakened, the fighting instincts in their blood still allowed them to unleash devastating power in the face of adversity. A 62-year-old man couldn't match the physical strength of his younger, more energetic peers. But Clint had adapted to the role of old man for 20 years. He understood the essence of a protracted war. In adversity, one must utilize every ounce of strength to the utmost, striving to squeeze every ounce of power from within to defeat as many enemies as possible. Rest and recuperation were essential. He stood in the shadows at the corner of the corridor, almost completely submerged in the crevice between the sunken walls. The bubbling staircase not far away hinted at the presence of aquatic monsters. And in the dark stairwell ahead, a faint glow of fire shone. The water stopped immediately after engulfing the castle's second floor, plus, a fire seemed to be lit not far away. My suspicions were correct. Those high-ranking figures hadn't fled the castle. They'd been hiding in the third-floor tower, directing and watching us fall into the trap. Hiding his axe behind his back, he reached into his bosom and broke off a small piece of bread soaked in seawater. The snow-white leavened bread, soaked in the salty, fishy water, wasn't a particularly appetizing treat. But Old Man Clint, with stealthy movements, stuffed it into his mouth, one piece at a time. In the empty corridor, he dared not make a sound, so he simply let his saliva break down the bread before swallowing it whole. The food passed through his intestines and into his stomach, bringing a pleasant feeling of fullness. After steadily moving the entire piece of bread down his stomach, Clint retrieved the wine flask from his waist and took a deep, powerful gulp. The strong liquor, like a stream of fire, revitalized his chilled hands and feet. In the seawater-filled stairwell, the bubbles suddenly thickened. A pale tentacle emerged from it, signaling the arrival of the first wave of enemies after a day-long battle. Clint had slain scores of drowned people and had a rough idea of their ranks. The lowest-ranking drowned people, like those now appearing, resembled humans in almost exact physical form. Compared to mortals, their skin was pale, their flesh devoid of any color. They possessed two special abilities. 1. They needed no breathing, allowing them to glide through the seawater for extended periods. 2. They lacked internal organs, allowing them to continue moving even after their hearts were pierced or their heads severed. Beyond that, their combat prowess was no greater than that of ordinary humans. Even their reflexes and attack speed were significantly inferior to those of mortals. Hiding in a crack in the wall, Clint held his breath, waiting until the two swaying corpses reached him. He swung his axe and effortlessly decapitated both. He then grabbed the two headless corpses, walked to the castle's windowsill, and flung them through the air with all his might. As for the two heads, he crushed them into pulp with 1 foot each. This was the most energy-saving way to deal with them. He had to be quick, as the next wave of enemies was likely to follow. Sure enough, the sound of dense bubbles bursting could be heard again from the puddle. Clint retreated back into the shadows of the wall. The second wave of enemies consisted of 3 monsters that resembled humans, but their limbs had degenerated into tentacles. These monsters were the mid-order chosen ones of the drowned path. Their offensive power on land was still not formidable, but their flexible tentacles allowed them to swim at incredible speed in the sea. They were a unit designed specifically for naval combat. Once caught in the water by these octopus monsters, a mortal would require immense strength to break free. Even a single gulp of water could kill even a powerful demigod from lack of oxygen. 1 verses 3, Old Man Clint showed no fear. Channeling his psychic energy, Clint imbued his axe with the divine might of a flame berserker. He emerged from behind the wall, his flaming axe instantly slicing an enemy vertically in two. Decapitation or severing the body in half was futile against this octopus monster. Even without its head, its body could still fight. Severing the upper and lower halves would even split the enemy into two distinct entities, making it a formidable opponent. After a day of fighting, Clint discovered the most efficient method was to chop the monster vertically, like chopping wood. The flaming axe wedged itself deeply into the octopus monster's body, and extracting it would waste considerable time. Therefore, after dispatching the first enemy, Clint immediately released his grip and unsheathed the hatchet from his waist. He hurled the hatchet, igniting in midair. The rapidly spinning wheel of fire pierced the octopus monster's skull with pinpoint accuracy. With a flash of his body, Clint arrived in front of it, gripping the axe handle tightly and pulling hard. A grimacing, singed gash appeared vertically. Amidst the blazing flames, the second octopus monster, engulfed in flames, collapsed in the glow. After dispatching two enemies, the final octopus monster had already wrapped its tentacles around Clint's neck. Seeing he was about to be trapped by its soft tentacles, he drew his only remaining hatchet and swung back. The sharp axe severed several tentacles, piercing his chest with a blazing flame. The intense flames, fueled by psychic energy, devoured his body mercilessly. In just 5 breaths, all 3 octopus monsters collapsed. The elderly man gasped for breath from the continuous battle, seemingly draining away all his newly gathered strength. However, just as he pulled the axe from the octopus monster's body, thump, thump, heavy footsteps echoed behind him. This time, the enemy wasn't coming from the pool, but from the dimly lit door behind him. Only then did the true power of the cult of Dagon reveal itself. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.